House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I would like to remind all witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either French or English. So if you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 83.1, the committee resumed its pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2026 budget. I would like to now welcome our witnesses. From the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, we have Mike Mueller, President and CEO. From the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association, we have Janice Tranberg, President and CEO, as well as Curtis Vanderheiden, Chairman of the Board of Directors. From the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, we have Keenan Loomis, President and CEO. And from the Helium Developers Association of Canada, we have Richard Dunn, Executive Director. We will now begin with Mr. Mueller for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of Canada's aerospace industry. I would like to start by acknowledging Budget 2025's removal of the aircraft from the job-killing luxury tax. That decision and the support of this committee in protecting Canadian aerospace jobs, strengthening domestic competitiveness, and supporting the hundreds of thousands of highly skilled workers across the industry. I want to thank the Minister of Finance and all parties in this committee for supporting the removal of this tax. Madam Chair, I've said before at this committee, Canada's aerospace industry is truly a strategic national asset with a world-class workforce and key industrial capabilities spanning civil aviation, defense, space, and emerging technologies. Our industry contributes more than $34 billion annually to Canada's GDP, supporting over 225,000 well-paying jobs right across the country, and we remain Canada's leading manufacturing R&D sector. Canadian aerospace is export-driven, innovation-intensive, and deeply integrated into North American defense, security, and economic systems. In today's geopolitical environment, aerospace is not simply a top manufacturing sector. It is a strategic sovereign capability as outlined directly within Canada's new Defence Industrial Strategy. AIC welcomes the release of the strategy, but the focus must now shift from strategy to execution, with industry engaged early and consistently as government moves forward with implementation. Canadian aerospace firms require clear demand signals, long-term visibility and predictability through procurement timelines to invest with confidence. As Canada's Minister for Defence Procurement, Minister Fear said, industry doesn't invest money on maybe, they want surety. And that's what the DIS is supposed to provide clarity on where we're headed. We couldn't agree more. For government to deliver on the strategy, procurement reform must be a strategic imperative. Procurement systems must not only be fair, open, and transparent, they must also be timely, effective, and outcome-driven. Innovation mechanisms such as Borealis and the Defence Investment Agency have an important role to play in procurement reform, accelerating Canadian innovation and industrial scale-up. The Investment Agency in particular has the opportunity to create a more agile, responsive, and outcome-driven approach. But the agency must be informed through early and ongoing engagement with industry to ensure alignment with industry timelines and supply chains. We are pleased to see defence funding increase to 2% of GDP, with the government's commitment to 5% in the coming years. I would encourage the committee to ensure that this is a continued recommendation. This brings me to my next point. Civil aviation and defence are two sides of the same coin. One cannot thrive without the other. To that end, Canada needs a complementary federal aerospace industrial strategy. A coordinated federal strategy for aerospace would help align investments, strengthen sovereign industrial capacity, and grow Canadian exports across civil, defence, and space. Canada-U.S. aerospace supply chains are deeply integrated and have been built over decades through shared production systems, certification frameworks, and trusted industrial partnerships. These supply chains cannot simply be restructured or replaced overnight. AIC is strongly encouraging governments on both sides of the border to maintain zero-for-zero aerospace trade through the ongoing tariff and CUSMA discussions. Lastly, accelerating aerospace innovation and getting products to market on a responsive and well-resourced depends on a responsive and well-resourced regulatory environment. Transport Canada plays a critical role in certifying new technologies, maintaining safety standards, and supporting Canada's international reputation as a top-tier aviation regulator. Canada is one of the only countries in the world capable of building an aircraft from nose to tail and certifying it domestically. That certification capability is a crown jewel of Canada's aerospace sector, and we cannot allow it to erode. AIC is recommending a review of Transport Canada's aviation-related governance structures alongside stable and predictable resourcing for civil aviation activities. Canada's aerospace sector remains the country's leading manufacturing R&D industry because of the highly skilled Canadians bringing innovative ideas to life every day. The industry is ready to deliver. The opportunity is now for government and industry to move with the urgency and ambition required to strengthen Canada's economic sovereignty and security in an increasingly competitive world. And if I could offer to all parliamentarians, we have workers and industry in every single region of the country, and we'd be pleased to host any of you at our facilities over the summer break that's upcoming. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Mueller. We will now move to Ms. Tranberg from the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association.
Thank you. So the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association is pleased to share our priorities for the 2026 federal budget. Alberta Cattle Feeders, is the voice of Alberta cattle feeders, beef farmers who bring calves into their farms and modify their diets from grass to high-energy feed to propel weight gain, thus using less land, less water, producing less methane, and over a shorter lifespan. Feedlots vary in size, but they remain family operations. They provide significant economic benefit to rural communities while making large-scale contributions to food security at home and around the globe. In Alberta alone, the economic output from cattle feeding is over $2.9 billion, and we employ over 20,000 people. Over 70,000 of Canada's fed cattle production takes place in Alberta, and in fact, 25% of Canada's production takes place in a 50-kilometer radius in southern Alberta. So with this context, I'm going to turn now to Curtis, who will outline 3 recommendations for the 2026 federal budget that can help Canadian farmers respond to evolving and difficult global realities.
Thanks, Janice. I'm Curtis Vanderheyden, chair of the Alberta Cattle Feeders Board. I'm a 3rd-generation farmer in southern Alberta, along with my 2 brothers and 1 sister, and we have a one-time standing livestock capacity of 40,000 animals. Our first budget recommendation is to continue to protect an unimpeded and tariff-free border between Canada and the U.S. The Canada and U.S. beef industries operate within a deeply integrated market, with cattle often crossing the border more than once in their lifetime. As an example, born in the U.S., transported and fed in Canada, and then retransported and processed in the U.S. The limits of transporting live animals over long distances has fostered this integrated market. Canada exports $7 billion of live cattle and beef annually. Of that, $6 billion is direct trade with the USA. While we support efforts to diversify trading markets, we must continue to work towards a positive outcome for the North American beef sector, including building long-term strategies for supply chain reliability. This includes addressing infrastructure gaps, border crossing challenges, and regulatory transportation barriers. To be reliable suppliers to national and global clients, agriculture producers need reliable and trusted supply chains. Our second recommendation is to modernize agricultural business risk management tools, or BRMs, to reflect current and future realities of risk threshold, inflation, farm structure, and global competition. Specifically, the Agri-Stability Program serves as one of the only support tools for cattle feeders during unforeseen adversities. However, there's been no permanent adjustment to the payments cap within the program in the last 20 years, despite profound increases in input costs and risk. The NCFA recommends agri-stability cap be increased to $15 million with a consideration to review the cap every 5 years. Our third recommendation is to permanently and profoundly change the approach to labor shortages in agriculture. With the majority of Canadians unwilling to work in rural locations, foreign workers are a necessity to maintain and grow the beef sector. The majority of the foreign workers hired by the cattle feeders are for year-round, long-term jobs. They're not seasonal. The foreign worker programs are fraught with delays and red tape, stunting the growth of Canada's beef sector. Further to this, once good employees are in Canada, it's nearly impossible to transition them to permanent residents who bring their families, reinvigorate our rural communities. We strongly encourage the government to permanently reinstate the agri-food immigration pilot and to build a foreign worker program specific to accessing foreign employees that will fill permanent year-round agriculture jobs and become permanent residents themselves. We must also invest in upgrading the skills of the existing workforce as technology rapidly advances. This includes AI, and the skill set required in agriculture shifts dramatically. Again, thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to the great discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Van der Heijden and Ms. Tranberg. We'll now continue with Mr. Loomis from the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Gould. Appreciate it, and the committee for inviting me to present on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction, and thank you for letting me do so from a Vancouver hotel room. CISC is Canada's voice for the steel construction industry, representing the steel manufacturers, fabricators, suppliers, constructors, engineers, and architects who are building Canada's infrastructure with steel. The steel construction sector directly employs 30,000 workers from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island and supports 100,000 jobs in total. 1 year into a trade dispute with the United States, the domestic steel construction industry faces continued disruptions that put many high-skilled jobs at risk. Recent 2026 changes to U.S. tariff policy further jeopardize the domestic market with surtaxes now applying even on Canadian fabricated goods made with U.S. melted and poured steel. This represents a major escalation, and coordinated federal budget measures are required to stabilize market conditions, counter trade barriers, and protect workers. The CISC recognizes and appreciates the federal government's efforts to support the industry, including trade measures, the Buy Canadian policy, and the Steel Trade Monitoring Task Force. Today and in our formal Budget 2026 submission, we recommend a few key steps to strengthen Canada's response to the U.S. trade war and protect domestic jobs in the steel sector. Our recommendations are to double the steel derivatives import surtax to 50%, to optimize the Buy Canadian policy by expanding its application to all federally funded projects, to expedite the implementation of Budget 2025 commitment to reduce freight rates by 50% to transport steel across Canada and expand this policy to include marine transportation. Number 4, to strengthen enforcement and monitoring of steel trade measures by continuing its work with industry through the Steel Trade Monitoring Task Force and expand Canada's trade remedy and anti-circumvention tools. My remarks will focus on our first 2 recommendations. In late 2025, the federal government introduced the 25% steel derivative goods surtax order. While the measure was welcomed by industry, trade data and market trends demonstrate that it has not been sufficient to curb the flow of unfairly priced steel products from non-market economies such as China. Statistics Canada trade data shows only a marginal decline in imports of key steel construction derivatives from China between Q1 2025, which is prior to the implementation of the derivative surtax, and Q1 2026, which follows implementation. Canadian steel fabricators continue to face significant pricing pressures when competing against imports from non-market jurisdictions. For example, a British Columbia fabricator manufactures a standard steel bolt at a cost of $26.90, while a comparable offshore non-market product imported from China lands in Canada at approximately $18.90 even after the application of the 25% surtax. Similar pricing disparities exist across a wide range of steel derivatives products used in construction, with some imported products entering the Canadian market at prices as low as half the cost of domestically produced steel products. The CISC recommends that the government increase the steel derivatives surtax to 50% to better address unfairly priced imports from non-market economies and strengthen the competitiveness of Canada's domestic steel fabrication sector. This measure will also support us in our long-term relationship building with the United States, who wants to ensure that Canada is not a backdoor for dumped steel entering the North American market. For recommendation 2, our best growth market is our own, so CISC applauds efforts to support manufacturers through the Buy Canadian policy. It is estimated that if the U.S. export market were entirely lost, our industry could lose between 3,500 to 5,200 jobs, including upstream and downstream employment effects. The potential job gains from replacing imports with domestic production would range from 10,700 to 16,700 jobs. The Buy Canadian policy announced in December was a positive first step that recognized the importance of using public procurement to support Canada's steel construction sector and strengthen domestic supply chains. By prioritizing Canadian steel and federal construction, the policy signaled that taxpayer-funded projects should deliver the majority of their economic benefits here at home back to Canadian communities. Gaps remain around how broadly this policy applies, how consistently is implemented, and how compliance can be assessed by industry and the public. Without clearer application, stronger transparency, and better coordination across jurisdiction, the policy risks falling short of its intent and limiting the benefits that federal infrastructure spending could generate for Canadian steel producers and fabricators. So as we have laid out in our 2026 federal budget, we have these recommendations that we appreciate you looking at. And once again, thank you to the committee for inviting me to appear on behalf of CISC. Thank you.
We will now continue with Mr. Dunn from the Helium Developers Association of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and committee members for the opportunity to address you today. Over the past few months, Canadian decision makers have increasingly recognized the strategic importance of helium to the Canadian and global economies and the significant potential of Canada's world-class helium resource. As well, consumers in the healthcare, high-tech, research, and defense industries are increasingly facing higher prices and uncertain supply now and into the future. The worsening global helium supply crisis resulting from the prolonged and growing Iranian war and the vulnerability it is exposed within Canada's domestic helium supply chain underscores the urgent need for governments to fully recognize the seriousness of the situation and implement the straightforward tax measures needed to strengthen Canada's struggling helium sector. Providing helium with the standard tax treatment and access to core incentive programs Canada provides all other critical minerals will allow the sector to compete and attract the private investment needed for growth, and in doing so, lay the groundwork for a secure domestic supply chain and position Canada as a reliable helium supplier to our allies, such as Japan and Korea, which are also facing the same helium supply shocks. Helium is an irreplaceable and essential input into the modern digital economy. Helium advances defense technologies, including aerospace, powers MRI systems, enables semiconductor manufacturing, supports nuclear energy, and is essential for critical research. Right now, the global helium supply chain is broken, leaving Canada and our allies exposed. On March 18th, an attack on Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial complex caused extensive damage to one of the world's most important helium hubs. Qatari helium production, fully one-third of global supply, is now offline and is expected to remain significantly constrained for years. Russia has implemented export controls, while the United States, the remaining major global producer, has limited spare capacity and is expected to prioritize its own domestic needs. The current situation is not an isolated event. This marks the fifth helium supply shock in the past 2 decades, reflecting a heavily concentrated global supply chain subject to geopolitical disruption. Despite having the world's fifth largest helium resource, Canada has no meaningful domestic helium supply chain. The limited helium volumes we produce are shipped to the United States for processing, as we have no liquefaction capacity of our own. The reality is we are entirely dependent on others for a strategic critical mineral resource we have in abundance. Surely counting on Russia, Qatar, and the U.S. as suppliers makes no sense. Given this dependence and the resulting risk to domestic helium supply availability and affordability, Canadian end users are raising their concerns. The Canadian Helium Users Group is calling for, quote, the establishment of a sustainable, stable, and secure helium supply in Canada, while the Canadian Association of Radiologists has called for Canada to, quote, invest in a sustainable national helium supply chain. In the first half of this decade, led by strong Saskatchewan policies targeting production of 10% of world supply, along with significant industry investment, Canada saw helium production grow, increasing from essentially 0 to 3% of world supply. However, in 2025, Canadian helium production experienced its first decline, a direct result of the challenging tax treatment the sector faces, constraining its ability to attract private capital. The Income Tax Act does not qualify helium as a mineral resource, the result being helium is the only critical mineral that is not able to access the core economic tools that Canada provides to incent critical mineral development. Those tools including competitive depreciation, flow-through shares, and exploration tax credits. The straightforward solution, supported by the provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and consistent with the precedent Budget 2023 provided for lithium from brine, is to designate helium as a mineral resource and qualify it for the critical mineral exploration tax credit. These actions will catalyze the private investment the helium sector needs to return to growth, and from there establish the conditions required to advance the construction of Canada's first helium liquefaction facility, a key element of a secure domestic helium supply chain. In closing, the current global helium supply crisis has exposed the vulnerability of Canada's domestic helium supply chain, underscoring the need for government to move decisively and expedite the straightforward tax measures that will enable our helium sector to attract the private investment so desperately needed. As Energy and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson recently put it, ultimately access to your own critical minerals is sovereignty. I hope that helium proves that to be the case in 2026. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Dunn. We will begin this round of questioning from Mr. Bonk from the Conservatives for 6 minutes.
Thank you. My questions will be directed towards the Cattle Feeders Association. So, Ms. Tranberg, we know that there's the North American cattle herd is probably the lowest it's been since the 50s is the numbers that we're hearing. And as Mr. Vanderheyden said, it's a completely integrated market between Canada and the U.S. And one of the concerns that we have as cattle producers in Canada is the upcoming talks with Mercosur on the free trade deal. Can you maybe give the perspective of how damaging and devastating that would be to the Canadian cattle industry?
Sure. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to pass it over to you, Curtis. But, you know, one of the statistics I talked about was how in this one area in Alberta, around the Pitcher Butte area, it's about a 50-kilometer radius, 25% of Canada's cattle reside in that area. Should we be hit with a disease, that would completely wipe out and decimate our whole entire industry. In Brazil, and other South American countries, CFIA has not done an inspection in over a decade. So we are very concerned with what are their controls around the health and the safety of animals. And we know they recently had a BSE case. And so that's a very significant concern for us should these animals and this beef be allowed into Canada. So that's one part of our concern. The other part is really around price, the pricing. So they can very much undercut Canadian cattle producers. And if we want to build the herd, we need to be able to have the prices that support that. So with that, Curtis, I'm going to turn that part over to you.
Perfect, Janice. You hit the nail on the head there perfectly. This Mercosur deal gives a complete wrong market signal to everybody currently in the industry, my generation, the new generations that are coming up. For reference, I'm only 40 years old. I've been in this business my whole life. Started actively working 15 years old every decision I make today takes between 1 and 2 years to get any fruits of that labor. Everything along the road is risks on, labor shortages that we talked to, disease that Janice mentioned. If we're going to start bringing in low-priced beef into the country, what is telling me or giving me a market signal I should risk more assets and capital to produce a very low-margin product with very high risk on a trade agreement that could very negatively affect my business going forward? Long-term food security, what does that mean? If we're not producing beef, if we're not putting the dollars back in the pockets of the ranchers, the finishers, through the whole value chain, because we're competing against a very low-cost product, Canada is no longer going to be a producer of world-class beef, and that is something that is not going to come back overnight.
On that, so we know, for example, in Canada, if there's a case of BSE, it's reported within days. And we've heard reports of BSE in Brazil that's taken over a year to be reported. So that's potential meat infected in the food chain, and we have no control over what happens there. Another thing that we've heard a lot this spring, or actually it was in January when it blew up, was the traceability requirements that were being foisted upon Canadian cattle producers by CFIA or CCIA, and there was a huge pushback on that. And we're concerned as cattle producers in Canada that if we have to abide by all these stringent regulations, why would we have a free trade agreement with countries that don't have to follow any of these regulations? And maybe you could just talk a little bit further on that.
Sure. Once again, I can start and pass it over. But as cattle feeders, we have been following the rules around traceability. Every animal that comes onto our farm gets run through a chute. There is more data on each and individual cow than there is in human health. We can tell you exactly what it has been given, what are the cutoff periods. I mean, the traceability is precise on the cattle feeding side. So we're very much in support of having traceability rules. But to your point, yeah, the fear is that we're going to allow beef coming in that doesn't have the same set of rules that we have. I don't know, Curtis, sorry, I probably...
Just jump in there because we have not too much...
Okay.
In the beef industry with the United States, and I know that they have expressed concern that if Mercosur deal did happen, that it would be a backdoor to cheap beef from that region into the U.S., and they're very concerned about that. What is the position of the Cattle Feeders Association?
Yeah, we've been told that by the industry that they're actually monitoring more beef that is coming in through Brazil, and there is a concern on this CUSMA, Canada-U.S. trade, Mexico trade deal, that should more beef start coming in through Canada and they see that coming into the U.S., that would definitely cause a red flag. So that's also a big concern for us.
I think I have time for one more quick question here. So to Mr. Vanderheyden, so you mentioned about increasing the cap to $15 million. And if we just do some quick math, $3,500 a calf going into your feedlot and you've got a 40,000 head capacity, 15 million is not by any means exorbitant. Could you maybe just talk a little bit further on that?
In 5 seconds or less. Yeah.
15 million is about half of what today's inflation costs would cover.
Mr. Bonk, we are going to continue now with Dr. Martin for 6 minutes.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Merci beaucoup à tous les témoins d'être venus aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much to all witnesses.
Research and innovation. I know that in your prior submissions, pre-budget submissions, there was a big emphasis on where I come from, what we call SHRED, support for research and innovation in science. And I'm curious if you could give us first just a bit of an update on the status of support for research and innovation in aerospace in Canada, and what more you think needs to be done there.
Well, thank you very much for the question. As I said in my opening remarks, innovation is absolutely critical to the aerospace sector. What we're developing now is going to be coming to market in a very long lead time. So innovation is absolutely critical. very proud of the industry, the number one innovative industry in manufacturing in the country, just because that drives it. You're absolutely right. The support from government through programs like SHRED absolutely support the industry, so we're very appreciative of the government maintaining that program. Very encouraged by the defense industrial strategy. We have Borealis, which is now in place, and bringing together all these different programs, such as the Strategic Innovation Fund, SIF. We saw a pretty major announcement underneath the defense industrial strategy to the NRC. I believe approximately $900 million for drone technologies, so all very important pieces. The one recommendation I would have is through some of the programs such as SIF, we need to simplify the processes, make them more timely for industry. So again, it's the age-old, how do you have government work at the speed of industry? It's very tough to do, but we need to take a look at some of these pieces, much like the procurement processes we have right now.
Thanks. And just building on this notion of the defense industrial strategy, as a healthcare person in my former life, I'm interested in the dual use application of many of the innovations that sit under the umbrella of the defense industrial strategy, particularly as they relate to sustainability of Canada's health systems, access to essential medicines, vaccines, and other critical supply chain and infrastructure to support the health of Canadians. What are the big areas of dual use that you see in the aerospace field, not necessarily for health, but I guess I would say for sort of domestic well-being, if you will?
Well, I do have an example specific to health, which I think very much illustrates this concept of dual use and the ability of maybe in the case of healthcare, non-healthcare, traditional healthcare companies. During COVID, we had aerospace companies pivot to designing, manufacturing, building, and supplying ventilators within a span of a number of months. And again, government was very clear in defining out the capability required, the timelines, the funding, and identifying it as, I guess, a bit of a sovereign capability. So a perfect use case in my mind for the defense industrial strategy. So you can have non-traditional companies pivoting into dual use where required. But some of the huge opportunities we see, firefighting, great announcement from the government, procuring 10 different aerial firefighting capacity over the next while, again, falling underneath the defense industrial strategy. You take a look at the new drone technology, there's quite obvious military purposes for that, but in a country so large and such a large Arctic, huge ability and the technology can be used. And I think of just the tie-in to helium, we got folks taking a look at some of the different airlift capacity that would be beneficial in the north particularly.
Certainly would agree with that, and I think the more we can emphasize that the dual use principle, particularly when it's publicly funded research and innovation that's taking place, I think the better for Canadians. Just a quick question for Mr. Dunn, because I recognize I'm short on time. You named several provinces that have supported, broadly speaking, the notion of inclusion of helium as a critical mineral for the purposes of tax incentives. Does that mean that there are provinces that are against it, or simply that those other provinces have been silent on it? I'm just trying to understand what is the case against the proposal that you've put forward for my education.
I don't believe there'd be any case against what we've proposed. As I said, it makes so much sense from a security of supply in Canada. The province that I mentioned, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, are the provinces in which helium is being actively explored for, or will be actively explored for. We get the tax measures right. Interestingly, Premier Eby from British Columbia, about a month ago, called for the government to have a First Minister's discussion on the Strait of Hormuz, and he actively referenced concerns with the restrictions on the global supply of helium. So it definitely goes beyond just the producing provinces, and I'm not aware of any provinces with any concerns about what we've proposed.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Martin. On va continuer maintenant pour 6 minutes avec Monsieur Garon, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
We'll now continue for 6 minutes with Mr. Garon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings to all witnesses here today. I'll start with you, Mr. Mueller. You're aware that I'm critic for the Bloc Québécois for the aerospatial sector. I represent Mirabel, and you know the importance of Mirabel for the industry in Canada and for my writing. Recently, the Bloc Québécois has been proposing an industrial aerospatial strategy. Recently, the minister was speaking to the industry committee, and I'll read what my colleague from Joliette asked. He asked, Canada is the only country with such an important aerospatial industry without an aerospatial strategy. Are you intending to implement one? And essentially, the minister answered that nobody in the industry was requesting such a policy, but rather that they were requesting a defense supply strategy. Has the industry been requesting an industrial strategy for the aerospatial sector, or am I dreaming? Thank you for the question.
From Mirabel, a great hub of aerospace in Quebec, but also right across the country. We've been very clear on the need for an aerospace strategy. We're very encouraged and support the government fully in the defense industrial strategy, which covers aerospace. Aerospace was identified as one of the key sovereign capabilities, which is absolutely critical. But we have been very clear on the need for that corresponding civil aerospace strategy piece. So again, we have Quebec that has an aerospace strategy, which is great. We have other provinces taking a look at how to drive this sector forward, and so it's been a long-standing ask of ours for that aerospace strategy. Again, defense being a large portion of that.
So we understand that for many years, the industry has been requesting a aerospatial strategy. According to you, what should be the parameters of this strategy? And can you explain to our colleagues across the aisle, and perhaps even to the minister who might read the minutes of today's meeting, the difference between a defense industrial strategy and a true aerospatial strategy? What is the difference between the two?
A great example of it. Defense obviously drives so much of this, and that's such a lever for the government to pull. So again, very complementary of the government, and the government also including the workforce into the defense industrial strategy. But you have to link that over together with the civil side. Aerospace in particular, as I said in my opening remarks, it's two sides of the same coin. You have defense capabilities that bleed into civil applications and vice versa. So huge opportunity to put an extra emphasis, if you will, on the civil side also. So again, certification, environmental regulations, workforce development, again, working in tandem with a very good defense industrial strategy. But that's what we're looking for.
Est-ce que je comprends bien que ça viendra en reconnaissance du fait que l'industrie aéronautique...
And would this recognize that the aerospatial industry is an industry with a very long cycle? It takes a long time to do research and to develop new vehicles. And when we have a military strategy and it comes time to renew our supply, we realize we haven't had a strategy for 2 decades or more, and that it's very costly in terms of supply. Am I right to understand this?
Again, very good pieces with respect to the defense industrial strategy, how that knits together the innovation cycles. But again, that civil side also cannot be ignored. So again, certification, environmental, workforce, and the innovation on the civil side. The defense industrial strategy, again, very great, good start, encouraging on the defense side, but drawing together some of those linkages on the civil side still required from our
Et on en
perspective.
convient, là, qu'on me comprenne bien, on est satisfait qu'il y ait de l'approvisionnement.
And we're very happy that there is defense industrial supply, but we recognize that this is the first in a series of many steps that have been asked for a long time. Some Liberal elected officials have said that a national aerospatial and aeronautics strategy would be unjust towards other regions of Canada that want to develop this sector, such as Manitoba, whereas a strategy such as this would reinforce the industry in Montreal, and this would be unjust towards other provinces. I won't name any names out of politeness. Would it be wise for a strategy such as this one to try to reinforce the aerospace sector in the greater Montreal area?
Aerospace is right across the country. Actually, I was out just in Calgary 2 weeks ago.
L'aérospace.
Canadian OEM starting up de Havilland Field. So while there is a very significant cluster in the Montreal area, it's right across the country. We're actually going to be holding our board meetings with industry out in St. John's, Newfoundland. So we're absolutely coast to coast, and we do feel strategy would benefit right across the country.
Donc, c'est une crainte injustifiée. Donc, ce serait une crainte injustifiée.
So this is an unjustified fear. Thank you. This is all for this question.
And I'm going to continue along a similar vein of questioning Mr. Mueller. Just around, it's been a frustration for me over the last 10 years where the government speaks a good game about supporting the aerospace industry, but then limits some of the key inputs to the aerospace industry. And one of them is pilots. And so I increasingly have to work with pilots to get their medical, which they need, in many cases, need every 6 months. So getting a medical exam, first off, and then getting an approval of that medical exam by Transport Canada. Do you have any recommendations on how that process could be improved?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a little bit outside of our bailiwick, if you will. We're focused on the manufacturing side of things. So there may
if there's no pilots, nobody needs planes.
I was just going to get to that. The broader ecosystem is incredibly important, obviously. So if you don't have pilots to fly the planes, they're not flying. If airlines aren't doing well, we're not maintaining those planes. So that broader ecosystem is incredibly important. But I couldn't speak to the specifics of the question you have.
Could you confirm to me that pilot shortage is a ongoing problem in the aerospace industry?
Well, the pipeline of high-skilled workers across the board is absolutely a challenge. I can speak maybe more eloquently to aircraft maintenance engineers, if you will. We're doing quite a bit of work with the federal government and the provinces to build out those pipelines that are then responsive to industry's needs. So quite a bit of work is going into that, because you're absolutely right. Over the next 10 years or so, we're going to need 50,000 new folks within the aviation industry. So some of the government's recent announcements around skills training, that focus, I think is a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, I was just wondering, what is helium used for? And I've recently come across this helium-3 that some folks are getting all excited about. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's helium used for and what's this helium-3 that we're hearing about?
Yeah, the properties of helium are unique in that it is the lowest condensing molecule. So this is what we use to cool the magnets in MRIs and NMRs, the nuclear magnetic resonance machines. And of course, we've seen in the press in the last month or two where the researchers that use NMRs for their research on cancer, et cetera, they're starting to be apportioned, and they can't complete that work. It's used. It's an inert. It's the most pure because it condenses at the lowest temperature. It's the most pure molecule at 99.999% purity, and this purity is absolutely critical for the environment to make semiconductors. So this is one of the large growth areas in the world with semiconductor manufacturing. And of course, with the United States reshoring their semiconductor manufacturing, that's one of the concerns where they're starting to more and more look inward for their own supplies, and Canada's supply chain is at risk. To your point on helium-3, so that the majority of helium is the helium I was referring to. There is an isotope of helium called helium-3.
Here, so I think you've answered that question appropriately.
Oh, it's used for quantum computing. Okay. Short answer.
Right. Mr. Epp, I'd like to share my time with you.
Thank you. Mr. Loomis, it's great to see you again. I want to congratulate your sector on getting the attention of government to get some TRQs and some tariffs in place for steel imports from non-market economies. I hear you. I hear the concern that the levels aren't high enough. So I have a two-part question. First of all, what's your level of confidence from that CBSA is actually catching the majority, or hopefully all of the imported steel that is coming from those non-market economies subject to over TRQ rates, be it at 25% or hopefully at 50%. I know the aluminum extrusion industry is still looking for the very same thing that you got the first time around. And a second question, can you explain to the committee steel I-beams? We don't make any in Canada. The I-beams back to the U.S.
Sure can. Thank you, MP Epp. Good to see you again as well. When it comes to CBSA, yes, because CBSA really didn't have to worry about this, and we didn't have to evaluate the content and proportions and various products and understand the derivative side of the industry, which is what most of steel products are. It's been an education for everybody, and we are working with them, coordinating with them, and I think that they are getting more and more knowledge. So we continue to, yeah. All right, thank you.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I'm going to ask a question on the temporary foreign worker program to Ms. Tranberg with the Alberta cattle feeders. So my previous life, I required temporary foreign workers because I'm in an agricultural field of year-round work that doesn't, it's not attractive to the youth of Canada today. But we have to come to the realization that it isn't. This ongoing argument about that people will do agricultural jobs like milking a dairy cow or feeding a beef animal, they'll choose not to do that because there's a lot of opportunities for the youth of today. And we encourage them to pursue their best career paths. But we still have to have agriculture. And so your recommendation to have a direct agricultural stream, I think, is a tremendous step forward just to identify that we need the year-round presence. So this isn't for the seasonal agricultural streams. That's fine. They function and the people go back home and they return. But there is an Australian model that I've looked at, and I just want your viewpoints on it. So in Australia, an LMIA is for 3 to 5 years, and it's tied to a region, so it remains open. So those workers that come have to stay in that region. So if it's an agricultural region, like you talk about where your beef feeding is occurring in Alberta, then they could leave a particular operation, but they would have to stay in the region to complete their PR and get their PR status. So just your thoughts on that. I think we need to incentivize the LMIA to get workers to come for agriculture and then have them a direct path to their PR.
Yes, thank you. So actually, I was just at a conference and they reminded me of a quote that I thought was really interesting. But primary agriculture actually employs more people than both the auto and the aerospace manufacturing industries combined. So and truly, getting people to work in rural locations in minus 30 and plus 30 degrees, and it's hard work. You're right, Canadians just don't want those jobs. So, but when we bring these people in, they become part of the rural fabric. They grow schools, they bring their families, they become Canadians. So we definitely need a process to bring them and get them through. I'm going to turn this over to Curtis because he actually hires these temporary foreign workers.
So you're right. We currently have 15 foreign workers working for us right now. The furthest ones that date back would be about 16 years. They are actually now Canadian citizens. These people, they come to Canada knowing what to expect. They come from an agriculture background. They have veterinary experience. It's very expensive to take a young person out of the city that wants the Yellowstone model, I call it. They think everything's a ranch, everything's fun. When they get boots on the ground, it's not the case. And there's quite a steep learning curve. A lot of resources used to train these individuals, never mind getting out to the rural locations to actually do the job safely. Foreign workers are a very big asset in helping us safely produce the beef that we have and being a long-term solution in our communities.
Can I just quickly add that an LMIA in Canada is 2 years, so it's pretty hard to come, get your new job, get settled, and also try to get your permanent residency in 2 years. So a 4-year LMIA would be fabulous.
Yes.
I like your answer. Industry, because I represent a riding in Prince Edward Island, and I would be criticized if I don't mention that there was a large investment in Summerside PEI just recently with MDS Coatings, an innovative company that's providing dual purpose for defense and other applications in the aerospace industry. Just wanted to kind of support Mr. Garon's statement, but I want a Canada-wide strategy for aerospace. I think that's important. Can you speak to all the opportunities that are there for youth? Like, we're doing a lot of apprenticeship training. Do we have to do specialized training for the aerospace industry as well?
You have about 20 seconds.
Oh, sorry.
Absolutely. Sleeman Park and PEI, just world-class facilities there. Lots of opportunities for youth. I did want to make a comment, though. Export is 80% of what we do, and I did want to make a comment in support of Minister Sadu and the free trade agreements that he's pursuing, in particular Mercosur, absolutely critical for our industry and for the youth that are entering the industry, to tie it back to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. On va conclure cette heure avec M. Caron pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
We will conclude with Mr. Garon, 2.5 minutes. Just to be clear, what I was saying is that, in my opinion, these kind of parochial fights should not stop us from having a national strategy. I think we're in the same line of thinking. Mr. Mueller, I read very carefully the document that you tabled for us, and you say that you would like to review the governance model of Transport Canada when it comes to regulation of aerospace activities. Do you have a particular idea in your head? Like, what do you think we should inspire ourselves from? You've got 1 minute and 50 seconds to answer.
What that possibly could be, because there's so many different models, but the outcome is more attention paid on aircraft certification, government providing more resourcing, as we talked about before. The innovation is moving so quickly, so how do you ensure you have the resources and the skills for Transport Canada to keep pace with what is going on? So if you take a look at the significant funding the government has put in on the innovation side, we do feel on the certification side that needs to keep pace. So it's more the outcomes of what we're looking for.
Par exemple, récemment, on a eu un épisode.
Recently, we had a moment when the White House was saying that some planes weren't getting certified quickly enough. Maybe they were right, but the fact is we didn't have enough resources to certify the planes quickly enough, and that was harmful to our commercial activities. But could this also be an irritant in our commercial relationships that we have with the States or somewhere else?
One particular situation, because I'm probably not qualified to do that, but the aerospace sector, strategic sector for the country, and I think a reputational sector for the country, and the ability to certify the new innovations that are coming forward, absolutely reputational. We're one of very few countries in the world that can do this. So, as I said, it's a crown jewel for the aerospace sector, and we need to keep doubling down on that, providing the resources, providing the attention to that. And it's absolutely critical, as I mentioned before, 80% of what we do is exported. If it can't be certified here in the country, it can't be exported. So again, this is an ecosystem altogether, and we need to be paying attention to every single part of that ecosystem, from the defense side to the civil side to the workforce to the certification, and then getting in place those free trade agreements, maintaining zero for zero.
Thank you,
trade,
Mr. Miller. That
US.
concludes our time. Merci, Monsieur Garon. Just a reminder for colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Garon.
During the committee, we like to have a respectful environment and listen to our colleagues ask questions and listen to the witnesses as well. With that, I would like to thank the witnesses for joining us today. We're going to take a brief suspension while we turn over for the next panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
resume the meeting. I would like to welcome our next round of witnesses. From CVW Sustainable Royalties, Inc., we have Akshay Dubey, the Chief Executive Officer. From the New Economy of Canada, we have Jason Clark, Vice President. From Stormfisher Hydrogen, Brandon Moffat, Chief Development Officer. And from the Transition Accelerator, we have Mo Kabara, Chief Executive Officer, who is joining us virtually. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by a video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in English or in French. If you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So we will now begin with Mr. Dubey. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear today as the pre-budget consultation for the 2026 budget. My name is Akshay Dubey. I'm the CEO of CVW Sustainable Royalties, a company that's at the forefront of sustainable finance and innovation. We began as a clean technology innovator, developing a commercially ready, made-in-Canada solution to one of the oil sands sector's most persistent challenges, treating and managing tailings. The good news is these tailings also represent a significant economic opportunity as they are rich in resources which can be extracted while also accelerating environmental remediation. Through our journey advancing this technology, we have seen firsthand one of Canada's largest innovation challenges. Many promising Canadian technologies struggle to move from demonstration to large-scale commercial deployment due to both capital constraints and a lack of industrial adoption. In response, we've expanded our business model to include a royalty financing platform that supports emerging Canadian industrial and environmental technologies. Our objective is to help fund and project finance for early-stage innovation before project finance for mature technologies. To date, this strategy has enabled us to finance Canadian technology companies engaged in waste asphalt recycling and sustainable ice production. Our own Creating Value from Waste, or CVW technology, has been developed to reprocess oil sands tailings before they enter tailings ponds. In doing so, our technology can recover hydrocarbons and valuable critical minerals that are currently being lost. Importantly, this one Canadian technology can simultaneously advance several national priorities: economic growth, job creation, emissions reduction, resource security, and critical minerals development. This is not an early-stage concept. This is a commercially ready technology that has advanced through piloting, engineering, and technical validation with support of both levels of government. If deployed across industry, we could recover approximately 12 million barrels of lower carbon oil annually, while also producing meaningful volumes of critical minerals from existing waste streams. Industry-wide deployment would recover 24% of global zircon production, 8% of global titanium production, and 14% of rare earth production. These minerals have already been extracted from the ground. They're just not being recovered today. Collectively, recovering these minerals and hydrocarbons would add $48 billion to Canada's GDP and over 144,000 person-years of employment. The environmental case is equally strong. By processing tailings before they enter ponds, our technology can reduce fluid tailings and water volumes and help address long-term liabilities. CVW can also prevent methane emissions at the source by recovering solvent before it degrades in tailings, thus reducing methane emissions by 90% from the single largest area source of methane emissions in the country. Industry-wide deployment would reduce CO2 equivalent emissions by 3 million tons annually, contributing 1/3 to the methane emissions reductions targeted in the Canada-Alberta Methane Equivalency Agreement referenced in the MOU. To unlock these benefits, we're proposing 3 key recommendations for the 2026 budget. First, expand the CCUS ITC so it better recognizes the full range of emissions abatement opportunities, including methane prevention. Canada's climate policy should not only incentivize the capture of emissions, but also incentivize the actual technologies that prevent emissions in the first place. Technologies like CVW can deliver this outcome. Second, broaden the clean tech manufacturing ITC to include mine waste and tailings reprocessing, as these are bona fide representations of clean technology and the circular economy, which we believe should be incentivized through this ITC. This change would also be more consistent with Canada's strategy, which includes resource recycling as part of the value chain. Third, expand the list of eligible critical minerals under the Clean Tech Manufacturing ITC to include titanium and zircon, which are strategically important for defense, nuclear energy, aerospace, and advanced manufacturing. Notably, titanium is on Canada's critical minerals list, and zircon has been recognized on critical minerals lists for many of our trading partners. We are also encouraged by the creation of the Canada Strong Fund alongside institutions such as the Canada Infrastructure Bank, Canada Growth Fund, and Strategic Innovation Fund. However, a persistent challenge that many public financing programs support only projects once they are already fully bankable, a stage where private capital is often readily available. In our view, Canada's greatest financing gap exists earlier in the commercialization cycle, where technologies need catalytic capital to move from demonstration to first-of-a-kind commercial deployment. This is where flexible capital is needed and where these pools of capital should be focused. In closing, the 2026 budget represents an opportunity to strengthen Canada's long-term economic competitiveness through targeted updates to the incentive framework, which will allow the deployment of commercial technology, innovation, and industrial capacity in Canada.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Dubé. We're going to continue now with Mr. Clark for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Merci à la membre du committee pour l'invitation.
Thank you to the members of the committee for the invitation.
We are an alliance of more than 70 businesses, labor organizations, and Indigenous partners. Together, we represent over 485,000 workers across emerging and traditional sectors such as manufacturing, electricity, mining, construction, and clean technology, generating over $200 billion annual in revenue. Increasingly, Canada's economic agenda is pinned to projects that require a significant amount of affordable, reliable power. Put another way, our electricity system is central to the country's economic growth, industrial competitiveness, and investment future. That's why Canada's national electricity strategy is so important. We need to double the grid and accelerate electrification while increasing the share of non-emitting sources of power as we track towards net zero by 2050. Expanding and modernizing Canada's grid will require an enormous amount of capital, up to $1 trillion by 2050 according to the strategy itself. Recent RBC analysis pegged electricity growth as a $680 billion investment opportunity by 2035 alone. The payoff is a Canadian economy that's more efficient, more productive, more energy secure, lower cost, and ultimately cleaner. The strategy sets the right ambition with technology that exists today, improving at great speed, and costs are coming down. To attract the scale of investment this opportunity requires, Budget 2026 can focus on two priorities. First, extend the clean economy investment tax credits to 2040, and invest in new major transmission projects. Please allow me to elaborate. First, Budget 2026 should expand, extend, and simplify the clean economy ITCs to 2040. Building a new energy regime will take dedicated long-term commitments from a diversity of investors. Stable and long-term tax credits give investors the certainty they need to deploy capital in Canadian electricity and manufacturing. Extending the ITCs by 5 years to 2040 will create a longer window for development, supporting new projects alongside industry, training providers, contractors, and asset owners by reducing the risk of rushed project timelines, workforce bottlenecks, and missed opportunities for project development. Expanding the criteria will help deliver on the economic potential of the tax credits themselves. Specifically, that means adding trusts, cooperatives, and other community-owned entities into the Clean Electricity ITC, and further, refining the Clean Technology ITC to ensure the 2023 Fall Economic Statement amendments to include waste biomass heat generation applied to integrated industrial process heat systems, including cement alternative, lower carbon fuel. Second, Budget 2026 should significantly invest in electricity transmission as a critical nation-building economic project. Silos of electricity are costing Canadians money and slowing economic growth. The federal government has three critical roles to play: direction, financing, and coordination. A low-cost immediate opportunity is developing a cost-benefit framework to identify the projects that will deliver the most benefits and the optimal financing to balance risk among provincial ratepayers and federal taxpayers. The government should invest in transmission interconnect strategy using tools like the Canada Strong Fund or alternative mechanisms such as debt financing. Finally, the government can help establish clear roles for governments and utilities to support the Provincial and Territorial National Energy Corridor Agreement. Here's the opportunity. Canada already has one of the cleanest electricity systems in the world. That's a major economic advantage in the global economy increasingly shaped by energy security, industrial competitiveness, and access to clean power. But with the ballooning demand of electricity from industry and households, that advantage won't hold. We need to build faster, connect our grids, and give investors certainty to invest here in Canada. The electricity strategy gets the ambition right, but Budget 2026 can go further by building the electricity system that growth will depend on. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Clark. We will now have Mr. Moffat, please, from Storm Fisher Hydrogen.
Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the committee, thank you for your time today. My name is Brandon Moffat. I'm the Chief Development Officer and one of the founders of a company called Storm Fisher. We're based here in Ontario, but we have staff in Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. And we are focused on the production of low-carbon molecules, so not traditional wind and solar, but making gaseous fuels and liquid fuels for hard-to-abate sectors. This could be natural gas utilities, this could be the maritime space, the aviation industry, both domestically and abroad. And so we've done this at home for the past 20 years and been able to attract both capital here at Canada as well as foreign direct investments across the nation. Our flagship project is in Varennes. We acquired a project and are now focused on the production of about 75,000 tons of what's called e-methanol to be able to supply to the maritime sector for those large container ships that you see coming into the ports to help them decarbonize, to comply with European laws and their own voluntary interests in the space. To be able to make that methanol, we actually source industrial CO2. So think about ethanol plants, think about landfill gas, where we will purchase that CO2 from them to be able to make these products that the market is asking for. We're here today because there's a couple of tweaks or changes we'd like to see in the clean hydrogen ITC to be able to unlock more investment across the country, but also to allow for competitiveness. We did complete an independent economic study. Philippe Goujon worked with us and others in the space to be able to look at what the impacts of the growth of this industry in Canada could provide. And in our case, we could add $1.1 billion of GDP over the next 10 years. You can look at that on a per capita basis, and we are significantly above the average here in Canada by the project just in Varennes. We would create hundreds of jobs, both at the facility, both in construction and operation, direct and indirect, which we think is great, and we'll add about $145 million in federal tax revenues to this. And so the changes I'm going to talk to you about actually pay themselves back quite quickly, but they do make us more competitive. This isn't just a one project situation. We think there's opportunities across Canada for the production of e-fuels, both in Quebec, Manitoba, British Columbia, where you have clean grids, it makes the most sense to be able to do that. We have the natural resources to be able to do this, so not like Alberta in the oil sands, but also in the other areas we can be able to use our resources to be able to help decarbonize both at home and abroad. People always say, who are you going to sell your molecules to? The EU has policies in place that they are trying to find these products globally, and we are competing with China and India for the production of these products and the delivery to them. The UK is looking for these products. We also see great opportunities to be able to decarbonize the north, not just from a, hey, it's lower carbon, but actually from a heads-up basis against diesel. And so we see great opportunities. Our first recommendation regards the clean hydrogen ITC. When it was originally conceived, you had the actual production of hydrogen. That was an area that was well understood that if you had a very clean grid, you could be able to get the ITC. But the downstream conversion of hydrogen to other products, ammonia was the only one that was allowed a 15% ITC. We'd like to level the playing field and allow all derivatives, so conversion of hydrogen to other products, to be able to receive that 15% ITC. And the economic study we did with Mr. Goujon showed that it actually fits within the existing budget for the clean hydrogen ITC, and so we think that it's net a positive to the country if we were able to make that change. The other change that we want to talk to you about is on the carbon intensity of the grids. The only province right now that can get the 40% ITC is PEI. So even though Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia have some of the cleanest grids in the globe, you actually can't unlock the 40% ITC. The ECCC views our grid based on kind of the embedded carbon in those assets, and so they actually view the carbon intensity as 10 times that of the European Union. And so what we want to do is adopt a European-style policy where any grid that's greater than 90% renewable unlocks the 40% ITC. We think that's beneficial not only to ourselves, but also to other projects across Canada, because as we've looked to pull back our electricity that we are exporting to the U.S., this gives us opportunity for economic development in Manitoba, British Columbia, and anywhere where these grids are relatively clean and we're looking for large load, and we can create good, very sticky jobs in these communities. I'd like to thank you for the time today. Look forward to any questions that you have. Merci beaucoup.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Moffat. I will now hear from Mr. Kabara from the Transition Accelerator.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Mo Kabara. I'm the CEO of the Transition Accelerator, and we are an independent organization that is focused on positioning Canada competitively within the energy transition. We work with industry, with provinces, utilities, financial community, as well as labor unions. So I want to start really today just by talking about the electricity strategy, about the size of the challenge it presents, and what really can be done about it specifically from the vantage point of a federal government and that jurisdiction. So for decades, Canada has invested, about 0.7% of our GDP in the electricity system. And for a decade, that was enough, right? Because demand was flat. But that era is over. And to electrify how Canadians drive, how we heat our buildings, how industry runs, we need to double that investment to about 1.7% of GDP. And that is an incremental $30 billion a year, every year for the next couple of decades. So this is a nation-building project, and the major and generation, transmission, distribution are going to take a better part of a decade to plan, permit, and build. And we're going to take the next couple of decades to deliver on the ambition of that strategy. So what I'm going to be really talking about today are three things. First is the proportionality. I mean, the federal government's flagship tool right now for clean electricity is the Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit. Jason just mentioned it. It's committed about $25 billion through 2034. As it was mentioned, the build out of the grid is going to be about over $1 trillion over the next couple of decades. So if we kind of annualize that, it's about $3 billion a year. If we take the investment tax credit against that incremental need of 30. So the question we should be asking, do we have the right level of support given the cost and the gap in the ambition? And then we go back to, well, this is a provincial jurisdiction. What's the role of the federal government? But the reality is that every dollar that goes into the grid is ultimately paid by one of two people or entities. So we have the taxpayer or we have the ratepayer. And then historically, it's been the ratepayer. So utilities borrow money, they build, they recover the costs on the monthly bills or from the ratepayers. But the idea, if we load a near doubling of investment entirely onto the rates, bills are going to go up at exactly the moment we're asking households and business to spend money to electrify and buy electrical equipment because that's going to save them money. So to buy an EV or a heat pump. So the rising bills don't just strain affordability, but actually can kill the very adoption and the market transformation that we're trying to do with the electricity strategy. So the question is then, what are the federal levers that can be done? I mean, Ottawa should not and cannot really fund the whole build. But most of the grid sits on, provincial balance sheets. So what can be done? One is to send a durable signal, so extending the clean electricity ITC beyond 2034 and expanding it beyond the current amount so that utilities are actually able to take this into their planning processes to be able to meet the ambition of the electricity strategy. Two, and this goes straight to the affordability question, the Prime Minister mentioned our AAA credit rating, leveraging that as an asset to help with funding this strategy in the build-out. I mean, we can look at the provincial utilities. Their debt is not equal. New Brunswick currently sits at about 97% debt to equity ratio, and that results in high cost of capital, which results in higher bills. So I think ultimately, whether it's loan guarantees, concessional financing, or the restructuring of that legacy utility debt, this is one lever that can be within federal jurisdiction, and it is a clean way to basically help shift the burden off of the ratepayers, which are Canadians, to help bring bills down for them. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about the end-use electrification. Ultimately, here we're trying to make sure that we have, the electricity, but also to electrify our economy. So things like the ISEF consumer rebate. We've seen what happens when it runs out of money abruptly and then it's paused. So I think when we're thinking about other type of end-use electrification incentives, I would really encourage a similar kind of dynamic of what was announced last year on the ISEF, where we have a little bit more of a scheduled ramp down. So things like the ZAVIP program, for example, for infrastructure, so zero emission vehicle infrastructure program runs out of money next year. There's no clear signal of whether that's going to be recapitalized. So really trying to just send clear signal also on the end-use electrification side in terms of the role that the federal government is going to play fiscally in order to support the long-term build-out of infrastructure and vehicle electrification, heat pumps adoption, and industrial electrification as well. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Kabara. On va commencer maintenant avec 6 minutes de Monsieur.
Now we have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Dubé. And the other witnesses, from what I understand from what you said today, is that the government has good intentions, but has not necessarily used the right means to move forward quickly and implement their dream or their good intentions, as it were. What is the most important element for each of your strategies or the government's strategy? Lou, what is the most frustrating element that could slow down the realization of your ambitions? We'll start with Mr. Dubé.
Yeah, look, I'd say from our perspective, our technology would fit very much within the definition of what the government's looking to do. It provides access to critical minerals, it provides access to hydrocarbons, it reduces emissions. But when you look at the major pieces of the investment tax credit policy that's been put forward, there isn't a single incentive that fits our technology. And that's because our technology fits between a few different verticals. So I think it's about taking, as you said, good intentions and a target for the federal government and implementing that in some processes and regulations that actually get to the results that we're looking for. So specifically for us, it would be inclusion in something like the Clean Tech Manufacturing ITC due to the benefits that we provide that are consistent with the goals of that policy.
Monsieur Clark. Thank you for the question. I think what we've seen is, for example, the government investing in the CRA in the recent spring economic update, which I think is really important. We've seen challenges in terms of project proponents seeking to utilize the ITCs, wherein there are significant requirements around the project criteria and the accounting there. And we've seen some delays at the CRA that I think the government's moved to try and address. It's unclear at this moment the extent to which that'll happen. We think there's further opportunity to simplify the ITCs that I think will match the ambition that the government set in terms of their uptake.
Merci pour la question. Originally, when the policy on the clean hydrogen ITC was developed, it was focused on a narrow set of parameters and worried that the industry was going to really explode and not be able to fit within the budget. That has not been the case. And so what you're seeing is a request to kind of reset the conversation as the industry has kind of come back down into really sort of core projects that's there. And so we've engaged both on the political level as well as with the senior staff to be like, all right, the industry is adjusting. We're trying to be able to move more quick around those types of changes to allow projects to be unlocked and create those jobs that I mentioned earlier. The other thing is around ECCC and the carbon intensity of the grids. We're actually treating our grid as 10 times worse than what the Europeans treat our grid. What we're trying to do is be able to unlock value here at home through the carbon intensity of our grids. The Quebec grid as a whole is 99.6% renewable. Why in the world would that have be treated as a dirty grid from our perspective? And so we see the ITC and the treatment of the carbon intensity of the grids being critically important.
Merci, Monsieur Cabrera.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm not here to talk about this per se, but I would echo the comments on the hydrogen ITC because I think that it doesn't make any sense to try to. I've worked a lot on that, and it doesn't really make any sense that we're treating a Quebec's grid that is not one of the best grids that we know the world kind of has, and not being awarded the full credit. But I would say, in terms of really the focus now for us and what I think is needed is again, what is the fiscal dimension of the electricity strategy that was announced about 10 to 11 days ago? And I think that really the scale here is that we have, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to be spending over the next couple of decades, you know, $1 trillion plus. And I think the ITCs were a good tool. I think the expansion of the ITCs at the provincial transmission. So before that, the ITCs included transmission between provinces. Now, in the strategy, it signaled that it's going to expand it to within a province, which we know that's the majority of the transmission that's going to get built. So I think that was a positive. We would also have liked to see ITC at the distribution level, right? So we know that we're going to have transformers, poles, wires. All of these things are going to be, you know, that in transmission is going to be at least half of that $1 trillion, right? But we currently don't have a mechanism to really support that. And again, it comes back to really what is the role that the federal government should play in terms of making sure that we're managing rates for Canadians. And like I said, I'm not suggesting that this is something that is wholly within the responsibility of the federal government. A lot of it, you know, obviously is, you know, is provincial. But really understanding the strategy set a new level of ambition, and we still only have the investment tax credits based on the previous kind of future-looking approach that we had.
I
remember that the Trudeau government wanted to plant 2 billion trees some 10 years ago, and ultimately they absolutely were not planted, and the current government decided to throw that away. So when we have development strategies as the one that was just announced for electricity, we need to put into place the right conditions for these projects to be realized. And I don't have the impression that these conditions are currently in place because there are still too many regulations. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. That's all for your time, and we'll continue with Mr. Lavoie for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. Very interesting. I took the time to read about what you're doing, to listen to your introductions. My first question for Mr. Cabana and Mr. Claire. I want to have your opinion on this. 3 years ago, I was presiding the Quebec Industrial Chamber of Commerce, and we were talking about investments, about the environment. People would amalgamate the two or oppose them. And we carried out a poll with a very credible firm, Léger, with a very low margin of error, below 4%. And we asked the question, I wanted to have your opinion on this question, and also take advantage of your presence today. The question is, in the context of economic development, what should be prioritized? The environment, the economy, or should it be 50-50? The answer was surprising. 66% of people said both need to be equal, and only 17 said economy and environment respectively. It surprised some people, and 3 years later, I'm wondering if it's realistic and feasible. At the scale of Canada as a whole, do you think it's something that's realistic and realizable? Mr. Clark first, and perhaps Mr. Cabana second. I don't know who wants to start.
I think that's one of the most exciting things about the national electricity strategy and the potential and the level of ambition that was put forward within it. The idea that not only do we have the potential to double our grid, but that we are putting some of the cleanest electricity in the world at the center of economic growth and our potential, not only to fundamentally electrify across the economy has all of those benefits in which I talked about. That fundamentally are a growth strategy or competitiveness strategy and have the benefit of being cleaner. But the opportunity is really about economic growth and really about the future of the country. So I think there's huge potential there. The government signaled, obviously, we have likely some time in which to consult. The provinces and territories are fundamentally critical. But we have a moment here. We have that opportunity. And so I would posit that that the potential for efficiency, the potential for productivity growth that we've all been searching for across the country could be embodied within what we see in the National Electricity Strategy. But I'll pass it to Mo.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll start by saying that 1988, James Hansen presented to the Senate that the world is warming, and that's almost 40 years ago. Photovoltaic solar was invented in the 50s, and it was deployed in satellites and out of space and little hand calculators. The drive to reduce emissions and to deal with climate change gave rise to the R&D and commercialization of these technologies. But very quickly, we've seen what happens when you have learning curves and you deploy manufacturing at scale, and those costs drop down, right? So we have cost at 90 to 95% cheaper on batteries and solar. And so I would say really the climate was the initial catalyst. The economics made it a better option, in a lot of cases. And now the geopolitics is making it strategic. And that's the geopolitics of what we're seeing with the oil shock and how that's driving things like, go look up what's going on in Korea. The other thing is also what's happening with China dominating that industry. So I think this is when I talk about, and when we talk about the competitiveness imperative for Canada, that's what we mean. So I don't think right now that really, as you were saying, there's a choice between environment and economic development. I would agree with those 50% or people that voted that, they think those things to go hand in hand. But because of the drivers and the idea that there are technologies that have been developed that are just superior from a cost performance perspective and also can secure sovereignty for countries in terms of energy security and not having to rely on imports. So I think what I would say there that I totally agree that this is an imperative for us, and electrification currently is driven by the economics and by sovereignty, and which is why it's important for Canada to position itself. And we don't want to spend $1 trillion importing stuff from the rest of the world. That's why I was really encouraged to see in the electricity strategy an emphasis on the supply chain development so that we are making components here at home. We know that we have companies like Hammond Power and Guelph that increased their transformer exports by 200 and some odd percent over the last 2 to 3 years, because that's what the world needs to power things like data centers, electric vehicles, industrial electrification. So I would say that not only is it okay or possible to do both, I think we have to.
Thank you, Mr. Kabar. I see I have about 15 seconds left, and we'll let Nicolas speak. Thank you for your answers. I'm glad that we don't perceive opposition between economic development and the environment, and that we believe the two are compatible. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lavoie. We'll continue with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, thank you to all witnesses for their presence. Thank you for your submissions. These are always interesting to read. I'll start with you, Mr. Kabar, since you're obviously interested in the transition, but also in technological means of getting there. I'm wondering, is Canada going to reach its transitional carbon neutrality targets for 2026, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think the interpreter said 2026. So on that, I would say definitely not. But for 2050, I'm assuming is what your question is.
Est-ce qu'on va atteindre notre cible prévue à l'accord de Paris?
For 2030, will we reach our Paris Accord targets?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a challenge that the world is facing. There is net zero, and emission reduction was never easy. And I think we hold the view, and this is something that you can look at, it's called the pragmatic climate reset. But the reality was that the world committed to the Paris Agreement, but there was no viable pathway to get to the 2030 target, which is a 45% reduction globally to emissions by relatively 2005. And
so it's 2035. Will we reach our objectives for 2035?
Right now, we're not on track, and I would argue, and we've been arguing that we were never on track, and no other country is on track.
Qui a décidé de nous quitter aujourd'hui.
So you agree with Mr. Guilbeault, who chose to left us today? 2050, will we reach our targets with current measures?
I don't think 2050 is off the table, but I think we'd have to basically think about this through the transformational change of the system, which would include things like the ambitions of the electricity strategy. So I would say the electricity strategy is probably the strongest anchor we've had to realistically reach that level of ambition when it comes to dealing with emissions at that scale.
De table, je vous cite, ça veut dire que c'est peut-être techniquement.
You're saying not off the table, so you're saying it's perhaps technically possible, but currently we don't have the policies required to reach those targets. Did I understand correctly?
I mean, we believe policies are one aspect of so we kind of follow the principle of three pillars. You have policies, which includes regulation standards. You have policies also that kind of fall into like pricing mechanism, and a third pillar, which is really the innovation and investments. And I think that currently, I don't think we have all three in place that I can confidently say we're going to hit net zero, but it's also what we're trying to do to position Canada to follow a path to net zero. And I would say right now, with the ambition of electricity strategy that was enunciated, I have way more confidence than before that electricity strategy that we are definitely on the right track.
Avant, donc vous êtes plus confiant.
So I understand you didn't have any confidence beforehand. Now you have some confidence. That's all well and good. We received another committee, Professor Helen Toos from the Canadian Climate Law Institute, and she said that the federal government's climate commitments are fluctuating. How can we trust commitments that fluctuate ceaselessly due to the government's colors, the prime minister's orientations, or geopolitical announcements? How can we have trust that these numbers will be true when policies change at the speed of the weather?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think we focusing and anchoring the progress on our pathway to net zero in something like electrification, which is, as I mentioned, is now all about economics and sovereignty, will definitely be more durable across political stripes.
Votre organisme, M. Cabaret, insiste sur la nécessité de.
We're talking about the necessity of implementing pathways of transition, the necessity of having an integrated approach that is economically viable, socially acceptable, predictable, with true coordination between actors. That's not what I would call something that aligns with fluctuating climate objectives. But I would like to know if the federal government's current trajectories are coherent with such an approach, and notably the intention of building new pipelines with Alberta, notably the intention to exploit the oil sands even more and to increase oil productions, to increase oil exports. For you, do you consider that that's part of an economically viable, socially acceptable plans that lead us to our 2050 objectives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that global oil demand is uncertain, and it's as I mentioned, it is evolving very quickly. We're seeing what's happening in Asia. We're seeing what's happening in some of the developing countries. When I look at Ethiopia and I see that 6 out of 10 vehicles sold there are EVs, not big.
Plus de pétrole, des sables bitumineux, ça fait partie de la transition.
Is more oil sands part of the transition, in your opinion?
I mean, I believe that electrification is going to be the main pathway that we actually transition our economy towards net zero.
Merci, Monsieur Garon. We will continue now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garon.
This is my first question to Mr. Dubé. Welcome, Mr. Dubé. Nice to see you. You've got a technology that's going to reprocess waste right now and actually bring us more revenue from waste oil that we can actually collect revenue from. So thank you very much for looking for the low-hanging fruit that actually makes a lot of sense in the Canadian economy. You're also going to get titanium and zircon and rare earth elements, all of which are in strong demand in the country right now. And you're also going to potentially get some methane reductions across the economy. So it sounds like a win-win-win as far as environmental, meeting the market, and actually getting some economic returns. So tell me what's holding back investors in this scenario.
Thank you for the question. I'd say there's probably two big challenges, which I sort of highlighted in my initial statement. One is the adoption by industry. And so when you look at the Canadian oil sands industry over the past decade have been not as forthcoming when it comes to innovation and deploying new technology. And a part of that is they've gone into an environment where the regulation has evolved. And so they've been thinking about where to spend those investment dollars. So I'd say there's an industrial side to things. And then on the incentives, I believe there's, again, been some changes in regulation, including the carbon tax regime, which has now evolved over the last couple of weeks as we've had a new announcement with Alberta that's now provided a little bit more direction in terms of where things are going. And so I think the stability of the investment environment is first and foremost going to be important for the oil sands to be able to implement these technologies.
Thank you. You mentioned getting some potential money here because of the announcement of the Canada Strong Fund. Is it your opinion that this Canada Strong Fund will give you below market capital?
I would say that we don't have a strong opinion yet. The fund has just been announced. We have looked at some of the other funding agencies that are already out there, like Strategic Innovation Fund, the Canada Growth Fund. I'd say the challenge that we faced when speaking to these government financing agencies have generally been that we need a fully financeable project right at the finish line before we'll get involved.
The end result there is, unless it is something that provides a bit of a subsidy in the financing mechanism there that isn't being met by the market right now, then that's where it's going to land for you. But those funds that are actually looking for market returns already exist, correct?
I believe so.
Thank you. I'll move my questions now to Mr. Cabrera. Mr. Cabrera, you talk about we're on the right path with the electricity strategy. I noted that down. I'm a realistic skeptic here, Mr. Cabrera, and you don't mind me saying that because, quite frankly, you've been at it since 2019, and I haven't seen the results around the world. It actually seems like we're increasing emissions with the strategy here. We're less sustainable as far as an electricity system. We're importing electricity now. We're actually unreliable, so we don't have electricity at key points, including points when it's too cold or too hot when we actually need that electricity. At what point in time here are you going to just actually indicate that maybe Canadians have to spend a lot more money on electricity, and you talked about ratepayers versus taxpayers. The two combined is going to cost a lot more and more or less drive us out of a competitive position as far as our electricity provision in the world.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McClellan. I don't think I understand the question. I guess if you're saying that we have not necessarily, yeah.
These are going to make electricity more expensive, less reliable. How is that good for Canada?
Excuse me, what are the policies that you're referring to?
Everything on the transition economy gifted from the federal government to get us through this policy equation, and so far let us down a black hole, if you don't mind me calling it that way, because electricity is more expensive for Canadians. There's a whole bunch of electricity costs being buried in taxpayer subsidies, and effectively we are unreliable now. We have to import electricity because of these policies we pursued over the last 10 years. Can you comment on that at all? How you don't think this is absolute failure as far as a policy for a country goes?
So, I mean, what I'm referring to here is the most recent policy, which also indicated, for example, a revisiting of the clean electricity regulations, which we are also been supportive of revisiting that because we believe in conserving affordability and reliability. We worked with folks from the Alberta system operator to the Nova Scotia Power, acknowledging that baseload power and also basically managing the grid requires more flexibility instead of just trying to get to a perfect clean grid. So, but most recently, I actually wrote
Continue now with Mr. Littau for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen,
Thank you very much for being here. Excuse me as I try to do something to my machine. There we go. Thank you for being here. I only have 5 minutes. One common element from your presentations is the need for the government to review, improve, simplify the ITCs, the clean energy investment tax credits. I think the message is loud and clear, and that's the purpose of pre-budget consultations, and so definitely that message will be passed along, and I will certainly be doing that follow-up. Just a couple of things, and again, thank you all of you for your presentations, and your. And we don't have much time, but Mr. Cabrera, you seem to be the person on the spot, so I'd like to pursue with you, because I think what you presented us is actually quite interesting. A couple of points. You very briefly talked about the pragmatic climate reset. Perhaps you could expand a little bit on that, because I don't think you had much time to.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reality that when the world adopted the targets, and again, actually, this is why I was kind of a little bit confused about the question earlier to me about just the green agenda. Like, what we're actually trying to push for is a pragmatic agenda focused on economics, and instead of trying to chase, for example, short-term emission reductions that can actually hurt our competitiveness. And the pragmatic climate reset is really acknowledging that when the world said we're going to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030, that meant that we had to accept that we're going to erase trillions of dollars of assets globally. And there was just no path for that. And I think now the world is waking up to that reality. We can sign agreements, we can sign deals. I actually think there's an opportunity for Canada to be a global leader in this space, to acknowledge the challenge of net zero and carbon management and removing or reducing emissions. It's not easy, right? It's not easy at all, and I don't think we can just paint it with a rosy picture and pretend that there aren't challenges that are economics and affect things like reliability and flexibility, which is why we really need to chart a path that really focuses on conserving those things. And again, I presented why I think doubling the grid, while it's still 82 right now, it's 82% clean. If we can get it to be 90% clean, it's double. I think that is, most people would say that's a great thing. But actually, that would not have been permissible under the existing clean electricity regulations. The clean electricity regulations were designed for 1.5x grid. We're talking about a 2x grid. So not only does the government should, as enunciated in its electricity strategy, that it is revisiting those regulations, I think it has a duty to, given that the burden of proof on the cost to society has not been properly assessed, given the level of ambition that was articulated in this strategy. So I think the pragmatic climate reset is really trying to figure out what is really going to intersect relatively to our other priorities as it relates to the economy, affordability, and increasingly the geopolitical priorities that we have as a country.
Strategy is usually important. You raised a very interesting question, and again, with a little bit of time we have left, and I think it's crucial to all of this. If ratepayers have to pay a very higher rate, then that restructuring legacy utility that in this process. Perhaps you could expand a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really have anything prescriptive, but I think this is something we need to be considering, because there is a lot of debt sitting on the utility books that, again, with higher interest rates than what we would get at the federal level, and Canadians are the ones paying for that through their rates. So I think thinking about how do we potentially restructure some of these utility debts through some sort of federal program to basically unlock those balance sheets, to allow those companies and the utilities to be able to borrow to build the big grid that can be reliable, can be affordable for Canadians.
One last thing, again, a few seconds left. It's not a fair question, just for a few seconds, but what's your view on data centers? There's a great race to build data centers. AI is growing very fast. huge amounts of energy, of electricity. So how do we square this circle?
In 10 seconds or less, please.
I don't think we could avoid them. I think we need to plan for them and basically figure out how we're going to accommodate that through our other priorities as well.
Thank you very much. Et on va conclure cette heure avec M. Garon pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Mr. Garon, 2 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Moffat, my question is for you. I must admit, quite frankly, that I don't know much about hydrogen, how it's made and all of that, but I understand that there is such a thing as clean hydrogen that could be used for the transition and dirty hydrogen that comes from hydrocarbons like tar sands. Can you explain the difference and how can you differentiate between clean and dirty hydrogen?
So today, hydrogen, called gray hydrogen, is produced by cracking natural gas, and you have hydrogen and CO2, and it's used in refineries. Clean hydrogen, and what we're focused on, is taking renewable power off the grid, taking water and splitting water to make hydrogen and oxygen. Both need to be able to be either utilized on the spot or converted into something else to be able to move that molecule to the market. And so in the case of the province of Quebec, you have a natural resource being the power grid. And so we can actually, to the conversation earlier, come offline when the grid needs our power, but the rest of the time we are a consumer and a part of the consuming base of that power to be able to make clean hydrogen and utilize the natural resources of the province to make clean hydrogen.
Okay. Question rapide, là, dans la conclusion de votre mémoire, là, vous affirmez là, que les modifications...
In your speech, you said that the modifications you are asking for in tax credits would be 94 million over 10 years, but it would generate and compensate by 145 million for fiscal receipts for the federal government. Is that because the new way that they are calculating the tax credits, and what would be the consequences financially for Quebec, or the advantages?
In the investment. So we put the infrastructure to work. We're actually paying tax during the construction phase and during the operation phase. What this helps us do is be able to pull down the cost of capital and our cost to be able to contract for the offtake of the product. So what we're doing is we're using the credit now, but paying it back over time. And so from our calculations with an independent economist is very accretive to the overall economics. All this money is already in the budget right now, and so we're just trying to retool the policy to allow us to unlock more and more investment both in the province as well as other parts of Canada.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Garon. On behalf of the committee, I would like...
Thank you, Mr. Garon.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we're going to get started for our final hour this evening. We are going to resume the meeting. I would like to take, before I take a moment to welcome the witnesses, I just wanted to let committee members know that next week we will be beginning the study for C30, and so the witness lists are due by 5 p.m. tomorrow. So please make sure that you get your witnesses into the clerks by 5 p.m. The clerks will send out an email reminder as well tomorrow for C30. Now, getting back to this meeting, I would like to take a moment to welcome our witnesses. We have from the Canadian Craft Brewers Association, Brad Goddard, the chair for the Policy Committee du Conseil québécois du commerce de détail. Nous avons Monsieur Damien Sillet, qui est le PDG.
Who is CEO.
Canadian Municipalities, the first vice president, et de l'Union des producteurs agricoles.
And from l'Union des producteurs agricoles, we have Charles Félix Ross, general manager, and then we also have David Tuga, coordinator, business economics. So we're
from the Canadian Craft Brewers Association. You will have 5 minutes, please. Just some background information before we start. Sorry, I got a little ahead of my skis. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating via video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use your earpiece and select the desired channel. I would like to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either English or French. If you will need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allotted for questions and answers. With that said, Mr. Goddard, you now have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee and Canadians watching at home. I want to start with a simple truth that anyone who's ever stepped foot in a tap room already knows. Craft beer isn't just a beverage. It's a community engine. It's a small town employer. It's a tourism magnet. And occasionally, it's the reason a group of strangers end up debating the merits of socks in sandals at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. But behind that easygoing pull-up-a-stool charm is a sector that works incredibly hard, and right now, harder than it should have to. Across Canada, 1,200 independent craft breweries are facing a challenge that isn't about creativity or quality or consumer demand. It's about a tax framework that hasn't kept pace with the industry it's meant to support. The Excise Tax Act, the backbone of how beer is taxed in this country, still treats craft brewers as though it's 2006. Back when flip phones were cool, Western Union was still sending telegrams, and the idea of a 500,000 hectoliter independent craft brewery in Canada felt like science fiction. I should add here, you'll hear me refer to a hectoliter. It is just a metric measurement of 100 liters or 2 kegs of beer. Today, the federal definition of craft tops out at 75,000 hectoliters. Provinces in the Canadian Craft Brewers Association recognize craft up to 500,000 hectoliters. This gap isn't just a rounding error. It's a steep climb, and too many brewers hit the top before they hit their stride. Now, to be fair, the federal government has taken meaningful steps. In April 2024 and again in April 2026, craft brewers received a significant excise reduction on their first 15,000 hectoliters of production, and that was welcome news, and we applaud it then as we applaud it now. But here's the catch. More than 60% of all the craft beer in Canada is brewed by breweries producing more than 15,000 hectoliters. These are the regional anchors, the ones hiring dozens of people, investing in equipment, building destination tap rooms, and drawing tourists into communities that don't always have a lot of tourists. And under that current framework, these breweries receive limited benefit. Their ability to grow is constrained not by ambition or demand, but by a tax schedule that punishes success. Let me put it into perspective. A craft brewery producing 25,000 hectoliters in the United States pays about $200,000 in excise. In Canada, $445,000. That's more than double and more than half of a brewery's net profits. Scale that up at 100,000 hectoliters, a U.S. craft brewery would pay $850,000. A Canadian craft brewery would pay $2.8 million. As a brewery grows, so does the disparity and so does the disadvantage. Meanwhile, craft breweries here at home are doing everything right. They invest locally, they hire locally, they buy Canadian ingredients. Their cost inputs are 3 times higher than large foreign-owned breweries, and yet they still produce 17% of all the beer we enjoy as Canadians, while generating 75% of the jobs. 30,000 people work in our sector, nearly 9,000 of them in tourism alone. This is a sector that punches far above its weight. It contributes $1.7 billion to Canada's GDP. It anchors rural communities. It keeps money circulating in Canada rather than flowing out of it. And it does all this while navigating U.S. tariffs and global trade pressures that don't exactly make life easier. So what are we asking for? Something simple, something fair, and something modern. We're asking that the Government of Canada adopt a progressive, growth-oriented excise rate schedule that allows breweries to grow to 500,000 hectoliters to help smooth out the climb towards the top excise rate. We're asking for a temporary relief of the first 15,000 hectoliters to be made permanent, and we're asking for a modernization of the rates between 15,000 and 500,000 hectoliters so that scaling breweries, the ones creating jobs, building communities, and strengthening domestic manufacturing, can continue to do exactly that. This isn't a handout, it's a hand up. It has the potential to be revenue neutral for the government. An economic impact study we developed with M&P has shown that every dollar saved goes straight back into the equipment, growth, and people of Canada. More importantly, it aligns federal policy with provincial definitions, industry realities, and the economic priorities of a government that has said clearly that it wants a stronger, more resilient Canadian economy that works for everyone. Craft breweries are ready to help that economy. We just need a tax framework that helps us grow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. On va continuer maintenant avec Mr. Silis du Conseil québécois du commerce de détail.
And now, Mr. Silas from the Conseil québécois du commerce de détail. You have 5 minutes.
Monsieur Siles, est-ce que vous...
Mr. Silas, do you hear me? Yes, apologies, my microphone wasn't working. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for welcoming me today. I am Damien Sillet, President and CEO of the Quebec Retail Council. The CQCD represents a large majority of Quebec retailers of all sizes across all sectors. We're here today to draw your attention to an issue that has become critical for the future of the Canadian retail industry. I am referring to the rapid rise of ultra-fast fashion and very low-cost foreign platforms such as Temu and Shein. I want to be very clear from the outset. The CQCD is not asking for protectionism. We're simply asking for a level playing field. Canadian retailers accept competition. They innovate, invest, and adapt. But they are asking that companies selling massively to Canadian consumers be subject to the same rules, the same obligations, and the same standards. Today, that is not the case. Ultra-fast fashion is no longer a marginal phenomenon. For a while, many believed that Temu and Shein were just passing fads. Our data show exactly the opposite. In April 2026, 30% of respondents had shopped on Temu in the past 6 months and 19% on Shein. And most importantly, the frequency of purchases is rising sharply. We're no longer talking about occasional impulse buys. We're talking about a recurring consumption habit, sometimes weekly. Today, there is significant unfairness. Canadian retailers comply with a significant set of obligations. They pay taxes, they comply with safety standards, they follow labeling requirements. They assume environmental costs, they manage returns, product recalls, regulatory compliance, and traceability. And the problem arises when foreign platforms can access the Canadian market without facing the same level of constraints or oversight. This creates a troubling situation. Compliance becomes a competitive disadvantage. It's also a question of consumer safety, and this business is built on trust. When a consumer buys something in Canada, they must be able to assume that the product is safe, compliant, traceable, properly labeled. However, several investigations have raised concerns regarding certain products sold on foreign platforms. potential presence of banned substances, non-compliant children's products, recall issues, poor traceability. And once again, the problem isn't the existence of rules. The problem is the uneven enforcement of them. No matter where a platform is located, if it sells to Canadians, it must comply with Canadian standards. We're also facing a major environmental challenge. Ultra fast fashion is based on a simple model: high volume, very low prices, and rapid turnover. The consequence is more textile waste, more packaging, more individual deliveries, and of course, problems recycling. Meanwhile, these costs are still largely passed on to communities. And so why is federal intervention necessary? This issue transcends provincial borders. We're talking about international trade, customs, taxation, product safety, competition, and consumer protection. In short, this is clearly a federal responsibility, and we have 3 recommendations. First, we need to define this ultra-fast fashion. There's no clear definition, and without one, it's difficult to target practices, to inspect, to regulate, or to implement appropriate measures. We're asking for a legal definition that clearly identifies this business model. We need a targeted definition, not a measure against the entire fashion industry. Secondly, we need to strengthen federal inspection capacities. Canada has rules, but the problem is their enforcement. We're asking for additional resources to increase the number of inspections, to strengthen customs controls, to improve coordination between agencies, to increase product compliance, to clarify the responsibilities of platforms. And our third recommendation, we need to launch a national awareness campaign. Consumers are drawn to low prices, but many are still unaware of the real impacts associated with this model: product safety, the environment, limited lifespan, privacy protection, impact on local businesses. We're not proposing that we limit consumer choice. We are proposing that we better inform them. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I will finish with a simple message. Canadian retailers are not asking for special treatment. They're just asking for one thing: fairness. And of course, you can count on our support in the future. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. First of all, I'm here representing the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We represent 2,000 communities across the country from coast to coast to coast. FCM is a national voice for Canada's municipalities across the country, and we also deliver the Green Municipal Fund in partnership with the federal government, and the programs help advance Canada's trade and diversification in the broader geopolitical environment. Mon nom est Tim Tierney, conseiller pour le quartier de Beacon Hill-Civil. I am a proud city councillor here in Ottawa and the incoming president of FCM. Canada is a defining moment, and municipalities are here to rise to the challenge. We are building and maintaining roads, water, sewer systems, transit, community infrastructure, and enabling new housing and economic growth. We are also responding to everyday growing problems within the homelessness crisis unfolding within our communities from every single size of community from coast to coast. We want our message here to be clear. The 2026 budget must strengthen the partnership between all orders of government and invest at the pace and scale that local infrastructure and help us power Canada. We must also work together to end the homelessness crisis. Budget 2025 took an important step forward through the creation of the Build Community Strong Fund. The recognition of the municipalities has been long understood. Local infrastructure is the backbone of the Canadian economy and essential to meeting the national priorities. Municipalities are ready to build, be it housing, strengthening our trade corridors, improving productivity, supporting defense resiliency, and the challenges of climate resiliency. Success depends on local infrastructure. Municipalities own and maintain 60% of Canada's infrastructure, yet we receive 8 cents on the total tax revenues collected by Canada. The winding down of the investment in the Canada Infrastructure Program creates an urgent need of renewal of long-term investment. Specifically, FCM is calling for the federal government to scale up the dedicated municipal infrastructure investments through the Build Community Strong Fund and to work with the provinces and the territories to maintain and expand the infrastructure previously delivered through the ISIP. We specifically recommend the significant acceleration of direct delivery and communities of the stream of the BCFS, which will ensure that the partnerships from provinces and territories is dedicated to municipal allocations. Canadians, we know that the net of the infrastructure is simply offset by the existing funding available that is delivered to communities. This matters because the infrastructure delivers the results. Every dollar that's invested in municipalities generates $1.8 billion of impact in Canadian economy and supports 9,000 jobs. Rural and Northern Canada cannot be left behind, with more than $108 billion in rural assets in poor or very poor condition. Securing dedicated funding for rural and northern municipalities under the Build Community Strong Fund is essential. And when it comes to homelessness, but this is a conversation not only about economic growth and job creation, this is about the quality of life and dignity of Canadians. Homelessness across in Canada has increased by 20% in the last decade, 20%. In the rural, northern, remote, suburban, and urban communities alike, local governments are responding to the growing encampments, rising shelter demands, and the increased pressures on the emergency community services. Mayors and councillors are doing everything they can, but municipalities can't solve this on their own. Canada needs a renewal of the National Housing Strategy with a much stronger focus on homelessness and homelessness prevention. The national crisis is requiring an ongoing national response. Communities need to be able to have stable, predictable funding for significant growth. This program reaching a $3.5 billion permanent annual funding indexed with inflation. Stopping people from falling into homelessness is the first key to success. And while we're calling for a renewal investment in non-market housing, supportive housing, portable housing benefits, and the prevention of focused programs. To tackle homelessness, we must recognize housing, healthcare, mental health, and addictions, justice, social services being all connected. Municipalities are ready to work with the federal government, the provinces, the territories, Indigenous partners, community organizations to make sure all Canadians have a place to call home. In conclusion, Budget 2026 is the opportunity for the ambition of the national leadership, investing in local infrastructure and building strong community funds. And of course, I look forward to any questions you have for us today.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Tierney. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Ross du Union des producteurs agricoles.
Merci, Madame la From the Union of Agricultural Producers. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for receiving us for pre-budgetary consultations. The Union of Agricultural Producers, which represents Agriculture of Quebec, wants to transmit a simple message. The agricultural sector is strategic but underfunded relative to its importance. Our industry feeds Canadians, supports the economy of regions, and needs to deal with increased commercial and geopolitical tensions, as well as extreme weather events and ever greater needs for investments. In this context, our main recommendation is for the federal government to increase in a major way its support for the agri-food sector, not just to reach a budgetary target, but to ensure that Canadian producers receive support comparable to those received by agricultural producers in other countries. Canada is behind the curve. Increased funding is required as well as a structured strategic plan. Otherwise, agricultural producers throughout the country will remain unable to deal with fluctuations and to invest in productivity and adaptation to climate change. Beyond this general recommendation, our memorandum identifies three major priorities. First, risk management. The costs of production have greatly increased these past few years.
2020 à près de 299 000 pour
There has been a roughly 50% increase in costs these past few years, which means that liquidities have become a central issue. Therefore, we want to fix the interest-free portion of the anticipated payment program at $350,000, which would give much needed predictability instead of having to renegotiate the threshold year after year. We also want to reform the agri-launch program, which exists since 2008, but is much too inflexible in its application. Finally, we want to improve the agri-stability program by increasing the reference margin to 95% and the compensation rate to 90%, as was offered in 2025. The program should also have an intervention floor to ensure minimal support to companies and producers who have been going through difficult situations for many years. Our second priority is research, innovation, climate adaptation, and organic agriculture. The agricultural sector needs strong and independent public research. Funding of research centers is needed as underfunding paralyzes the adaptation needed to face climate change, improve practices, and ensure competitiveness of Canadian farms. We therefore ask the government to review its decisions to strengthen research into science and technology, notably through living laboratory initiatives and by launching a federal program to share costs of organic certification. If Canada wants to develop this sector, it needs to facilitate certification. Third priority, workforce and private forestry. Producers who use temporary foreign workers have increased housing needs and are asking the federal government to financially accompany them. We would like housing for temporary workers to be recognized as agricultural spending, notably for sales tax purposes. We also propose a tax credit for small producers investing in equipment. The vast majority of small Canadian farms have gross revenues below the threshold that would be needed to take advantage of the current tax credits. The reality of farms has changed, and many farms are used by more than one family. Succession no longer goes through direct filiation. We would also like a harmonization of the tax credit for food donations, and we support the creation of a personal tax regime for owners of private forests. Budget 2026 needs to recognize that agriculture is not a secondary preoccupation, but is an investment in food safety, the vitality of a region, climate adaptation, and the economic resilience of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Ross. That is all for our time. We'll start with Mr. Lefebvre for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses here today. My first question will be addressed to Mr. Godard from the Association of Canadian Microbreweries. I would like to know what is the impact of the automatic annual increase of the alcohol tax on consumers and producers.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable member. There is an impact for the 2% annual increase. It drives for the brewery I work at. It means that because the increase happens, it actually claws back all of the reduced excise I would pay earlier in the year because excise is progressive. And so that 2% escalator does have a impact. The impact is smaller as breweries, if breweries are quite small, but as these regional craft breweries grow, the impact is a little bit more profound. However, saving the 2% escalator probably wouldn't be a big enough change to the Excise Tax Act to truly help grow craft independent breweries.
Et merci beaucoup. J'aimerais que vous me détailliez, tantôt vous nous avez...
Thank you. Earlier, you mentioned political changes, policy changes you would like to see. Could you elaborate on what specific policy changes you would like to see?
Yeah, 100%. So thank you, Madam Chair, and to the member. Right now, Canada's definition is of a small independent craft brewer is 75,000 hectoliters. Many of the fastest growing craft markets in Canada define it as 350, 400, or 500,000 hectoliters. And so that is the big challenge of the Excise Tax Act right now, is it measures the size of a business 20 years ago, not the size that our businesses have grown. So that is the top one. Excise in and of itself is built structurally quite well. It's a progressive tax. So at the January 1st, all breweries start at the lowest tax bracket. And then regardless of your brewery size, as you grow each month, you get remeasured for your tax rate. So we like the functional structure of it. It's just we would like a longer runway, as it were, instead of a brewery becoming the top tax bracket at 75,000 hectoliters, the brewery would hit the top tax bracket at 500,000 hectoliters. So that would be the top change. And then all of the graduated rates in between those 2 points would fall in step.
Votre analyse, vous dites qu'il y aurait peu d'impact.
So according to your analysis, there is no financial impact with your proposed formula. Would it be possible to send your proposition in written form?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Chair. And to the member, we worked with M&P to model out proposed excise tax rates at a 50% reduction using 500,000 as the top rate. And working with M&P, we were able to model out the economic impact of very modest growth for the breweries that are impacted by this excise tax reform, and the growth that goes along with those breweries offsets the lost revenue to the government. So we will send that along to the committee.
Merci. Merci. Ma question maintenant va être pour M. Tierney de l'UMQ. Bonjour, merci d'être présent avec nous. Les gens ici savent qu'avant d'être député...
Thank you for your presence. Some people know that before being a federal MP, I was also an MPP and a city councilor for your own city. Your involvement is very impressive and inspiring. I would like to mention that concerning municipal infrastructure, we're always giving the example of heading into a wall. According to you, if we do nothing for the next few years, what will happen with our municipalities?
Merci. Thank you very much, Chair, and to the honourable member. Yes, and thank you for your the work you've done federally, provincially, and municipally. I think that's very important. Look, we see a big problem that's taking place with infrastructure. People remember how much they pay municipal taxes, as you know. They have a harder time with federal and provincial, so we always need the assistance to ensure that our infrastructure stays in place and is well built. This ties directly into what our ask is, because in Ottawa, being here in Ottawa and a city councillor, we've actually, with the assistance of the Housing Accelerator Fund and a lot of the great programming that's coming out, we've actually doubled our housing to be able to create new housing for people. So there is a massive connect between having stable infrastructure. It allows us to be able to help out more on the homeless side as well. But we see in Calgary, we've seen in Ottawa in the past, where infrastructure is failing across the country. And certainly that's why we're here today, is to really preach on, if we can get more money for infrastructure, you will see dollar for dollar a return within your communities.
Et une des notes que vous nous dites, c'est que si on n'a pas les...
And one of your notes is that if we don't have infrastructure in place, 36,000 fewer units of housing will be built. And you say that we have challenges when it comes to housing. We need to build, but if the basic infrastructure, if it's not there, we cannot build. It's a chicken and egg problem, so we need to invest massively and give you the necessary levers to build.
Is. And thank you very much, Chair, to the member. That's exactly it. Every municipality across the country, we're not looking for big, beautiful things to build anymore. We're really focused on municipal infrastructure so we can deliver what Canadians want and need right now. We have a homelessness crisis right now. And to be able to achieve what we want to be able to do with the assistance of the federal government, we need that infrastructure in place, because there is a big cost. And there is a noted change between what we've seen in the past. So we're very thankful for that, but we need a little bit
Thank you,
more.
Mr. Tierney. Merci, Monsieur Lefebvre. Ça conclut le temps. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Létard.
Thank you. This is all for your time. We'll continue with
Alors, messieurs, merci beaucoup.
the honorable member. I will share my time with my colleague, Ms. Church. Thank you for participating in this exercise. It's very important for us in anticipation of the coming budget. Mr. Silas, I will start with you. We had spoken a while ago.
Qui est très important et peut-être.
You brought up a very important issue which is not discussed enough. Temporary fashion, which is certainly not a passing trend. It's becoming more and more rooted in consumer habits. Consumer protection is under provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government certainly has a role to play. So how do you see that? For the federal government, what would you like us to do? Is it related to traceability of products or related to consumer health? What do you see as the role of the federal government in this issue?
Regardez, votre question est...
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the honorable member. Your question is essential because it touches on a problem that is currently exploding in Quebec. You're sick. When you take your drugs, you explain your symptoms to the doctor. When we want to legally define temporary fashion, we need to give instructions to customs to know what products to control, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of products that are delivered every day throughout Canadian airports and throughout the world. So we need to be able to give clear definitions. For example, Temu makes 7,300 new products per day. Zara, which is considered as temporary fashion, makes 150 new products a day. So we're not talking about the same thing. We need to give customs the tools, and to do that, we need to be able to legally define ultra-temporary fashion. And we're not the only ones. Europe is ahead of the curve. The US has suppressed a de minimis threshold to control that. Europe has decided to tax certain products. But the first thing we need to do is to know exactly how to define these products. Then we can work with customs. Then we'll be able to find solutions. Temu has 600,000 products below $30, and generally controls begin around the $20 to $30 threshold. So it's very difficult to have rules to define ultra temporary fashion. I will let Ms. Church, my colleague, have the mic.
Rich and expansive discussion this evening on a variety of topics. Mr. Tierney, I'd like to actually come back to you and to this question of housing and homelessness, because I thank you very much for raising such an important topic for us. And as you know, with Build Canada Homes, part of that new organization is a set aside for $1 billion that is being directed towards supportive and transitional housing. And it offers, I think, a great opportunity for collaboration with municipalities, unlocking land, with nonprofits, with wraparound supports being built into projects from the ground up. My question to you would be, how can we ensure that these funds are used or deployed as efficiently as possible to get the right kind of projects up and running quickly to tackle the problems that you're talking about?
Through the chair, and thank you, honorable member. Absolutely that. Accountability is key, and making sure that delivery happens almost immediately. I think Ottawa's a gold star example of what we're doing right now. You're seeing that money being invested immediately. Municipalities across the country also want to invest immediately, but having the development charge made whole was always a concern. It looks like there's been a lot of clarity on that. I think that's going to help. Obviously, there's still concern on the rural and these less suburban northern areas, but we're working with the government. We think that we have a plan. We're going to be able to roll that out, even if it means working with the provinces. We have no objection to that, but ensuring that there's benchmarks to make sure that we're rolling things out in a fashion. Look, municipalities are ready to deliver. We've proven it here in Ottawa, and across the country, we're quite ready to do the same.
To prioritize one or two spots of the different types of services or the different features of these projects as they're coming together, what would it be? What could we really hone in on working with you to get these projects up and running quickly? Is it the wraparound piece? Is it finding the municipal land and trying to find better ways to unlock it, or the matchmaking between the partnerships? What advice would you have for us to really accelerate what we're doing?
A very brief response, please.
You know what? All of the above, unfortunately. In Ottawa, we have a great relationship with all, but at the same time, again, making sure we have that money for infrastructure leads to even creating more homes for people, which is important. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Garon pour 6 minutes.
Merci. We'll continue with Mr. Garon for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the time today. Greetings to all witnesses. Thank you for your presence. I'll start with a gentleman from the Union of Agricultural Producers, Mr. Ross. In your document, you outlined the importance of funding research and innovation in agricultural practices. You probably see my question coming. You know, with the cuts that were imposed by the Carney government, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has just closed its Quebec Research and Development Centre in Mr. Lightbound's riding after 58 years of activity. I'd like to know what will be the consequences of these decisions. Why is it essential to preserve our know-how in terms of agriculture and agronomy? The consequences will be a loss of our international standing. Canada is already investing 50% less relative to our GDP in agriculture and agri-food compared to comparable countries like OECD countries. These cuts will essentially lead to weakening of Canadian competitiveness. So we will move backwards instead of forward. Thank you very much. And in a context where we're talking about improving productivity and adapting to climate change, they are closing the center, which is of great importance. Absolutely. I would like to talk about agrivolence. I don't know everything about the program, but I know there was flooding a few years ago, and our agricultural critic at the bloc was asking the minister to relaunch Agri-Relaunch, and he was running after the minister, couldn't find him, and it was very complicated, and it leads us to believe that this program is not activated quickly enough, that the criteria are unpredictable. And what you say is that agri-recovery, the objectives of agri-recovery are good, but that the means employed are not sufficient. So what are Quebec's needs in terms of agri-recovery reform, and what should we do in that regard?
L'agri-stabilité, l'agri-investissement sont pas en mesure d'intervenir, ou l'assurance production, sont pas en mesure d'intervenir rapidement sur les entreprises parce que c'est des pertes qui sont pas visées par les programmes ou c'est des pertes qui sont extraordinaires. Dans ces situations-là.
In these situations, agricultural producers need help faster, either to meet liquidity needs or to relaunch the business. For example, if there's flooding or if there are natural disasters or very serious climate events. The agri-recovery program, we need it to be able to formulate a demand to the provincial government. The provincial government then needs to accept to present a demand to the federal government. If they've intervened in the past for the same loss, we can't do it again. So there are so many criteria that make it difficult to look for money for similar problems. So the provincial government needs to present a long demonstration to the federal government. And we need to convince, first of all, the provincial government, which will finance or pay 40% of the bill.
So if I understand correctly, uh, it's taking too long, and we need to exercise the criteria of the program without you having to go to 38 all the time. Yeah, exactly. So what we're proposing is an improvement of agri-stability. The problem is that when it's been going on for, so let's say for several years, your revenues are too high, then you don't have a security net, and your reference margin doesn't work anymore. And so agri-stability doesn't work anymore. So what we've proposed, and we've done this for several years, is that could we not just have a floor with a minimal guarantee of part of the businesses so that they can invest, let's say, to feed animals or to buy seed or other events. Yes, okay. Okay, you talked about investment, and I'd like to hear what you say. We have an agricultural model which is different than North America, which is occupation of the territory, more smaller family farms. And within that context, you're looking at a tax credit of 40% for small agricultural farms that are acquiring materials of some kind. Explain. Out of the 28,000 members, 42% have $100,000 in revenues or less in their farms. So these people are doing, they're not doing part-time agriculture, but we need for them to be able to develop their businesses. So a tax credit on investments would really help these smaller farms and get them to a better development and expand and become full-time farms, and at least they'd be able to live from farming. And this could also help the next generation and bring the kids into the farming. Yes, what we saw in the last few years is that let's say vegetable farming, we see producers who are doing intense vegetable farming on 1 or 2 hectares with very few people.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions will be directed to Mr. Tierney over today. Congratulations on your new role with the Federation. I represent Mission Matsqui Abbotsford, and in 2021 we experienced one of the most costly natural disasters in Canada. My riding was also burned to the ground in the Fraser Canyon region, and just last year we had another major and catastrophic flood. The Sumas Prairie region of the Fraser Valley has an international airport with the new national firefighting fleet being constructed there. We have hydro transmission lines. We have the Enbridge pipeline that just got approved for expansion by this government. We have 37% of all oil going to United States through the Trans Mountain pipeline goes right through the flood zone. The pipeline was like a toothpick because all the land got washed away around it during the floods. We have an international border crossing. We have the major arterial road connecting the Fraser Valley with Vancouver and the rest of the province. When we also have a southern rail line, that's a rail line to United States, in addition to CN and CP just a few kilometers away in Matsqui Prairie. We are also the breadbasket of British Columbia and produce a large majority of the vegetables, fruits, poultry, and dairy that are consumed in British Columbia. What advice would you have for Abbotsford, which has not received any additional infrastructure dollars from the federal government to protect national supply chains, the sovereignty of our country, and the well-being of millions of people that are connected with these critical infrastructure points?
Yeah, I think it speaks to a lot, and you mentioned the wildfires. FCM has been very strong. We have a $3 billion investment. We work with the federal government and providing a lot of resiliency. I think that is a very key part that we want to continue to work with the federal government on and roll out. When it comes to things like infrastructure, that's clearly what we're here to talk about today. And of course, there's other items like we look at crime and safety and bail reform as part of what we do as well. That being said, We do have we have a lot of resources within our country, and I think it's critical that obviously they're shipped. But when it comes back to the questions of resiliency, I think we do have opportunities that municipalities should take advantage of through our Green Municipal Fund.
Yeah, you mentioned the Build Communities Strong Fund.
Yes.
And I know there's $6 billion allocated out of the $50 billion over a 10-year period. Would the Federation of Canadian Municipalities be supportive of Abbotsford receiving a portion of that fund to protect this national corridor and the supply chains and the billions of dollars in taxpayer money that is generated from this key area in Canada?
Yeah, again, we take that back to our membership. We do have our AGM, oddly enough, thanks for the tee up there, coming up next week in Edmonton, oddly enough. And at that point, we have discussions with members where we see priorities, and certainly that has come up, as well as many other areas within Canada. So that's why we're here, is to make sure we all sing from the same songbook and ensure that we receive the monies that are appropriate to municipalities that are in need.
Well, you mentioned it was a defining moment, and I truly do hope that FCM, and I invite you to Abbotsford. We'd be happy to have you. It's a defining moment for our community. The Fraser Valley is a region that is not really understood by Ottawa too well. We're very far away, but when the Port of Metro Vancouver was cut off from the rest of Canada, that did open up some appreciation for how important we are and all of how the Port of Metro Vancouver is connected to all this vital infrastructure as well. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you.
Very much.
That's my time.
Early. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Viz. On va continuer maintenant avec Monsieur Lavoie.
We will now continue with Mr. Lavoie, 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for playing along this afternoon in this very important game. I would like to share my time with my colleague, Mr. Goddard. My question is for you. I have 2 microbreweries in my riding of La Souche, and I did a round table recently with some business people. Jean-Pierre was telling us how worried he was with the situation with the aluminium, and I'd like to know how much this affects you for the cans and the viability of these microbreweries, and how can the government help you out?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the honourable member. Aluminum, and Quebec makes most of it for North America, is a huge concern. Aluminum is the second only maybe to kegs, which are made of steel. Aluminum is the primary way craft beer gets to market, and those current tariffs have seen our aluminum prices skyrocket at a time when Canadian consumers aren't really willing to pay more for beer. And so generally the cost of aluminum, that increased cost of aluminum that we've been experiencing over the last year, has come out of margins or bottom lines for breweries rather than coming out of the consumer's pocketbook. So it would be good. There are some things that the federal government could help encourage to create more sheet aluminum in Canada. We actually make a lot of beer cans in Canada. We make a lot of aluminum ingot. It's just the aluminum ingot has to go to the US and then come back to Canada to be made into cans. So there's probably an opportunity there, but as a craft brewer, aluminum cans are a huge strain on our business because it is our path to market.
Merci. Je vais laisser M. McDonald.
Thank you. I'll let Mr. McDonald go on now.
Another question on the craft brewing. In your presentation, you talked about the excise tax and the level of the 50% reduction on the first 15,000 hectoliters. You didn't think that was high enough. Where would you be looking at offering a reduction in excise tax? To what volume? You mentioned that most of the craft breweries that are, mid-size are producing a lot more and they need more benefit.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, and thank you to the honourable member. 15,000 hectoliters, great support there. What we'd look at is stretching it from 75,000 hectoliters, which is currently the federal government's measuring stick for a small craft brewery. We'd look for the federal government to match Canadian provinces like Saskatchewan, which define craft brewers at 500,000 hectoliters. And I talk in hectoliters, and a friend of mine uses a great analogy to kind of ground it, is imagine we're using the word dollars instead of hectoliters. And right now, a brewery making $75,000, like income tax, pays the same income tax as a brewery making $1 million. You know, it helps to use the word dollars instead of hectoliters because volume kind of is difficult to understand. But we would look at revising that top runway from 75 to 500, and then that will create a gentle slope up to that top tax rate that we think small businesses could plan around. Right now, it's quite steep, and it's hard for a small business to invest capital to grow a business when their incremental tax rate, I mean, excise rate now doubles basically in the first few steps. It doubles every 2,500 hectoliters. Which is maybe the only industry that has such a rapid rise in tax rate.
500,000. What percentage of the beer industry would be represented in that group of companies?
So 60% of the beer that we drink as Canadians is made by brewers north of 15,000 hectoliters. So a pretty significant portion of the beer, the craft beer that Canadians drink, would benefit from that reduction in excise tax.
Quickly to the Union of Agricultural Producers in Quebec. You mentioned increasing the advance payment program and also the agri-stability trigger. Did you say 85% from the 70% that's currently at?
Yes, exactly. Oui, 85% de garantie.
Yes, guaranteeing 85% of the margin of reference. Yes.
Very much in line with the other recommendations we've heard at the Ag Committee. Is there any other improvements to agri-stability you could recommend?
Très brièvement,
Oui.
10 secondes.
Oui, d'introduire un plan.
To introduce a guarantee, a floor, a guaranteed of margin for all farms, because after a few years, if there's a bad revenues, there's no security whatsoever. We will conclude with Mr. Garon, 2 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like Mr. Ross to ask you a delicate question. The government has already invested $4 billion in an unexisting high-speed train. No cost-benefit analysis independently has been carried out. It has been done without any form of consultation whatsoever, but was adopted under Bill C-15, certain measures of expropriation to create two classes of citizens, those who are along the corridor, who would be subject to expropriation, second-class citizens where they have no recourse, no hearings in order to evaluate the necessity of being expropriated or not, as well as 15% of the project being in order to be able to get the land rights. So there's already a lot of money has already been spent in, it's practically been a PR farm. There's been intimidation, bullying with farmers, especially in my riding. I am really worried. I think you know about this. People in Mirabel are worried. I think they're right to be worried. What do you think about these measures that are contained within Bill C-15? What in general do you think about the way that the government is acting? People in Mirabel and also in the Lanaudière and in the Morrissey and in Portneuf, all of the Ontario rural part too, because that project is going to cut in half 2,000 properties. Is huge. We completely disagree with the C-15 and the expropriation measures and the way they're trying to do this very, very quickly to the farmers. We think that the Alto project is a bad project, and we want Mr. Carney's government to reconsider this project. It's not that we're against the train. It's not that we're against economic development, but there are alternatives that are better, and we could use CN rails that exist right now. We could have a high-frequency train. Okay, sorry, 20 seconds. Do you think that the farmers along that train track feel respected by the government? Well, I don't want to get into respect or non-respect. What we want to ask the government is to reconsider the project, which is a bad economic project. It's going to cost us at over $200 billion. So that money could be invested in agriculture, and we could develop our own agricultural economy in Canada.
For appearing with us this evening, and with that, committee is adjourned.